The winter wind howled across the Wyoming plains, driving needles of ice against the stagecoach windows as Emma Hayes clutched her worn leather journal to her chest. Everything she truly valued in this world was contained in those pages. Memories of her parents, recipes passed down through generations, careful accounts of every penny saved and spent. The rest of her possessions fit in a single carpet bag, tucked beneath her seat. At 24, Emma had learned that life could strip away everything except what you carried inside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pine Ridge Station, last stop before nightfall. The driver called, his voice barely audible over the gathering storm. Emma's heart thundered in her chest. After 3 days of travel, she had reached her destination. And her destiny, the letter that had changed her life, was folded carefully. In her pocket, its creases softened by countless readings. An offer of marriage from a man she'd never met, Jackson Cooper, cattle baron of Evergreen Ranch. She hadn't sought this path. But when blight took her family's crops and the bank seized their homestead, when her father's cough finally silenced him forever and her mother followed weeks later, Emma had found herself facing a future with nothing but debts and impossible choices. The advertisement had seemed like Providence's answer: established rancher seeks practical wife of good character, must understand farm management and bookkeeping, photograph not required. Emma had responded honestly about her skills, with crops and animals, her education in accounting at her father's insistence, her circumstances. What she hadn't mentioned was how the neighboring farms had failed one by one, how she'd fought until the very end to save her family's land, how she'd developed a spine of steel beneath her plain exterior. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, throwing Emma forward. She steadied herself, taking a deep breath as the door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid air. "Welcome to Pine Ridge, miss," the driver said, offering his hand. "Someone meeting you?" "Yes," Emma replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Jackson Cooper." The driver's eyebrows shot up. "Cooper, of Evergreen Ranch?" Emma nodded. "Well," he said, something like pity crossing his weathered face. "Good luck to you, then." Emma stepped onto the frozen ground, adjusting her woolen scarf over her simple brown traveling dress. The town of Pine Ridge was smaller than she'd expected. A church with a crooked steeple, a general store, a hotel, the Golden Spur Saloon, and a scattering of other businesses lining a single mud-rutted main street. She stood beside her carpet bag, scanning the faces of the men moving about their business in the fading afternoon light. Which one was Jackson Cooper, the man who would become her husband? "Miss Hayes?" Emma turned to find a man approaching, tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 40, with a neatly trimmed beard containing streaks of silver. His clothes were of good quality but practical, and he wore them with the ease of a man unconcerned with fashion. "Yes," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "Frank Miller, foreman at Evergreen Ranch." He touched his hat respectfully. "Mr. Cooper sent me to fetch you." Emma couldn't hide her surprise. "Mr. Cooper didn't come himself?" Something flickered across the foreman's face, discomfort or perhaps embarrassment. "He was detained by business matters. The wagon's this way." Emma followed Frank Miller to a sturdy wagon at the edge of a town, her mind churning with unease. Was it common for a man to send his employee to collect his bride-to-be? Or was this the first sign that her decision had been a terrible mistake? "Storm's getting worse," Frank observed, helping her onto the wooden seat. "We'd best hurry if we want to reach the ranch before dark." As they pulled away from Pine Ridge, Emma noticed the sideways glances from townspeople, the whispers behind. "Ooh, hands." Frank kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. "Is it far to Evergreen Ranch?" Emma asked, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "About 5 miles," Frank replied. "Best cattle operation in the territory. Mr. Cooper built it from nothing." "You've worked for him long?" 15 years, since he first came out here with nothing but a dream and a handful of cattle." There was undeniable loyalty in Frank's voice. Emma's curiosity grew. "What kind of man is Mr. Cooper?" Frank hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Fair, demanding but fair, expects a full day's work but pays better than most, keeps his word." He glanced at her. "Not much for socializing." The wagon crested a rise, and suddenly Evergreen Ranch spread before them, a sprawling collection of buildings dominated by a large 2-story house of squared logs and stone. Numerous outbuildings, barns and corrals surrounded it, and in the distance, despite the snow beginning to dust the landscape, Emma could see vast pastures stretching toward mountains on the horizon. "It's impressive," she said softly. "Mr. Cooper built every inch of it," Frank replied with evident pride. "Started with 20 acres and a lean-to, now owns 10,000 acres and the finest breeding stock this side of the Mississippi." As they approached, Emma noticed a man standing on the front porch of the main house, tall and imposing even at a distance, his stance that of someone accustomed to command. Jackson Cooper. Even from here, she could feel the intensity of his gaze as he watched their approach. Frank helped Emma down from the wagon as they reached the house. Up close, Jackson Cooper was even more intimidating, over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, piercing blue eyes, and a handsome face set in stern lines. His dark hair was cut short, and unlike many men of the territory, he was clean-shaven. His clothes were of excellent quality but practical, the garb of a working rancher who happened to be wealthy, not a dandy playing at the role. "Mr. Cooper?" Frank nodded. "Miss Hayes has arrived safely." Jackson Cooper's eyes swept over Emma, in a single assessing glance, taking in her simple travel dress, her carpet bag, her unadorned appearance. Something that might have been disappointment crossed his features so quickly Emma almost missed it. "Miss Hayes." His voice was deep, his greeting formal without warmth. "Welcome to Evergreen Ranch." "Mr. Cooper." Emma extended her hand, determined to begin their acquaintance with dignity. "Thank you for meeting your advertisement. I appreciate the opportunity." He took her hand briefly, the contact impersonal. "Frank will show you to your room. I imagine you'd like to rest after your journey. We can discuss arrangements over dinner." Without waiting for her response, Jackson turned to Frank. "The cattle in the north pasture need to be moved before this storm worsens. See to it after you've settled Miss Hayes." "Yes, sir," Frank replied. Jackson nodded once at Emma, a gesture of dismissal rather than welcome, and strode away toward the barn, leaving her standing in the cold with her small carpet bag and a growing sense of unease. Frank's expression was apologetic. "He's got a lot on his mind with this storm coming. Let me show you inside." The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior. Spacious rooms with high ceilings, quality furnishings, large fireplaces. But Emma immediately noticed that for all its grandeur, it lacked the touches that made a house a home. No photographs adorned the walls. No personal mementos occupied the shelves. No evidence of a woman's hand in arranging flowers or selecting curtains. "Mr. Cooper had this built 5 years ago," Frank explained, as he led her up a wide staircase. "Designed it himself. The guest room is this way." "Guest room?" Emma questioned. "I thought—" Frank looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Cooper thought you'd be more comfortable here until arrangements are finalized." He opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a dressing table, wardrobe, and a window overlooking the ranch. "Bathrooms and down the hall. Dinner's at 6. Mrs. Whitley, she's the housekeeper, will bring up hot water for washing." "Thank you, Mr. Miller." "Frank, please, Miss Hayes." "Then you must call me Emma." He nodded, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Don't judge him too harshly, Emma. Mr. Cooper is a good man, better than most. He's just—" Frank seemed to search for the right word. "Complicated." After Frank departed, Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing her composed facade to slip. This was not the welcome she had imagined. Jackson Cooper had barely looked at her, had hardly spoken 2 sentences to her. Was he disappointed in her appearance? Had he expected someone prettier, younger, more refined? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A plump, motherly woman with grey-streaked hair entered carrying a pitcher of steaming water. "Mrs. Whitley, I presume?" Emma smiled, rising to her feet. "That's right, miss. Thought you might want to freshen up before dinner." She set the pitcher on the washstand, then turned to study Emma with frank curiosity. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "So you're the one who answered Mr. Cooper's advertisement?" "Yes, I'm Emma Hayes." Mrs. Whitley's assessment was open, but not unkind. "You're younger than I expected, and prettier too, though you could use some meat on those bones." Emma laughed despite herself. "It's been a lean year." "Well, we'll fix that. I'm a firm believer that most problems look better after a good meal." She bustled about, laying out towels. "Mr. Cooper doesn't say much, but he runs a good house. Fair wages, decent hours. He seems—" Emma hesitated. "Reserved," Mrs. Whitley snorted. "That's putting it kindly. Man's got walls higher than the Rockies." She paused her work, lowering her voice. "You should know, miss, this marriage wasn't his idea." Emma's heart sank. "I don't understand. He placed the advertisement." "His lawyer did, at the insistence of Mr. Cooper's investors." Mrs. Whitley sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but you seem like a sensible girl who deserves the truth. Mr. Cooper's expanding the ranch, planning to secure a contract with the railroad to supply beef back east. The investors are old-fashioned types. They think a bachelor is too unpredictable for such a significant investment. They made marriage a condition of their continued support." Emma felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. "So I'm a business arrangement." "To them, yes." Mrs. Whitley patted her hand. "But that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Mr. Cooper's not an easy man to know, but he's fair and honorable. He wouldn't have agreed to this if he wasn't willing to make a genuine go of it." "I see." Emma's mind raced with this new information. No wonder he'd seemed so distant, so unwelcoming. He hadn't wanted a wife at all. She'd been forced upon him by financial necessity. "Dinner's at 6. Mrs. Whitley reminded her, rising to leave. "Wear something nice if you have it. First impressions matter, even if they're technically the second." After the housekeeper left, Emma opened her carpet bag and surveyed her limited options. She owned exactly 3 dresses: her traveling outfit, a work dress for every day, and her best dress of deep blue wool, saved for Sundays and special occasions. It wasn't fashionable or elaborate, but it was clean, well-made, and brought out the color of her eyes. As she changed and arranged her hair in a simple but flattering style, Emma considered her situation with the practical mindset that had helped her survive thus far. Jackson Cooper needed a wife to secure his business interests. She needed security and a home after losing everything. Perhaps they could forge a partnership of mutual benefit, even if romance wasn't part of the equation. She had never been one for fairy tales anyway. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 6 as Emma descended the stairs. She found Jackson Cooper waiting in the dining room, standing by a large fireplace that cast dramatic shadows across his face. He turned as she entered, and for a brief moment, something like appreciation flickered in his eyes before his expression returned to its usual impassivity. "Miss Hayes." He gestured to the chair at the opposite end of a table that could easily seat 12. "Please be seated." Emma took her place, noting the excessive distance between them. "Your home is beautiful, Mr. Cooper." "Thank you." He remained, standing until she was settled, then took his own seat. A moment later, Mrs. Whitley appeared with the first course, a hearty beef soup that steamed in the cool room. They ate in silence initially, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the howl of the wind outside. Finally, Jackson set down his spoon and fixed her with a direct gaze. "I imagine Mrs. Whitley has informed you of the circumstances surrounding my advertisement." Emma met his eyes steadily. "She mentioned that your investors made marriage a condition of their continued support." He nodded, seemingly unsurprised by her directness. "Then we can dispense with pretense. This is a business arrangement, Miss Hayes. I require a wife to satisfy my investors and secure the future of this ranch. You require security and a home after losing your family's farm. I believe we can reach terms that benefit us both." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm outside. "What terms did you have in mind, Mr. Cooper?" "A marriage in name and legal standing. You would have your own room, of course, but would be expected to perform the duties of mistress of Evergreen Ranch, managing the household, accompanying me to necessary social functions, presenting the appearance of a proper union. And in exchange, you would have security, comfort, an allowance for personal expenses, and the status of being Mrs. Jackson Cooper. Upon my death, you would receive a generous pension." Emma set down her spoon, appetite gone. "You speak as if drafting a contract rather than proposing marriage. Isn't that what marriage fundamentally is? A contract between two parties for mutual benefit?" His expression remained unreadable. "I have no interest in romantic notions, Miss Hayes, and I suspect you are practical enough to feel the same. We are both adults who understand the world as it is, not as poets imagine it to be. Even practical arrangements require trust and respect, Mr. Cooper." Something shifted in his eyes, surprise perhaps that she would challenge him. "I offer both, Miss Hayes. I expect both in return." "And children?" Emma asked, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite her discomfort with the topic. "Would they be part of this arrangement?" For the first time, Jackson Cooper appeared genuinely disconcerted. "I had not considered that aspect." "Perhaps you should," Emma replied quietly. "Before we proceed further," Jackson studied her with newfound interest. "You're more forthright than I expected. I've learned that dancing around difficult subjects rarely leads to satisfactory outcomes." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "A sentiment I share." He rose from his chair and moved to the window, watching the snow that now fell heavily outside. "I have built this ranch from nothing, Miss Hayes. 15 years of back-breaking work, calculated risks and sacrifices you cannot imagine. It is my life's work, and I will do what is necessary to protect it, including entering a marriage of convenience." He turned to face her. "But I am not a cruel man, nor am I unreasonable. I will treat you with respect and provide everything you require for comfort. I ask only for your discretion, your cooperation, and your loyalty to Evergreen Ranch." Emma considered his words. This was not the future she had imagined for herself. Yet what alternatives did she have? Return to a hometown where only debts and pitying glances awaited her? Seek employment as a housekeeper or seamstress, forever at the mercy of others' whims? At least here she would have stability, purpose, and a measure of independence that few women enjoyed. And perhaps, in time, this stern, complicated man might come to see her as more than a business necessity. "I will agree to your terms, Mr. Cooper," she said finally, "with one condition of my own." His eyebrows rose. "And that is?" "Honesty. Complete honesty between us, even when it's uncomfortable. No secrets, no hidden resentments." If this arrangement is to succeed, we must be able to speak openly with each other. Jackson Cooper studied her for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. Then he nodded once, decisively. Agreed. We will be married on Saturday. Judge Patterson can perform the ceremony here at the ranch. I see no need for elaborate preparations or public spectacle. Saturday? That's only 3 days away. Is there a reason to delay? The storm will have passed by then, and the sooner we formalize our arrangement, the sooner my investors will release the funds needed for expansion. Again, the cold practicality of his approach caught Emma off guard, though it shouldn't have. No, I suppose there isn't. Then it's settled. He returned to the table, but remained standing. I have matters to attend to in the barn. Mrs. Whitley will see to anything you need. Good night, Miss Hayes. Good night, Mr. Cooper. Emma remained at the table after he left, her soup cooling forgotten before her. The wind howled outside the windows, snow piling against the glass. In 3 days, she would become Mrs. Jackson Cooper, mistress of Evergreen Ranch, wife in name only to a man who saw her as a business necessity. This was her new reality. She would make the best of it, as she had made the best of every hardship. Life had thrown her way. Emma Hayes had survived drought, bankruptcy, and the deaths of everyone she loved. She would survive this too, and perhaps in time even find a way to thrive in this beautiful, lonely place. What she couldn't know as she finally rose from the table was how quickly her practical arrangement with Jackson Cooper would be tested, or that the greatest threat to their newfound understanding was already making plans in a saloon 5 miles away in Pine Ridge. The next morning dawned clear and blindingly white. The storm had blanketed the ranch in nearly a foot of snow that glittered like crushed diamonds under a brilliant blue sky. Emma rose early, dressed in her everyday gown, and made her way downstairs, determined to begin familiarizing herself with what would soon be her domain. She found Mrs. Whitley in the kitchen, already preparing breakfast. The housekeeper looked up in surprise. "You're up with the roosters, Miss Hayes?" "I'm accustomed to early hours," Emma explained, rolling up her sleeves. "On our farm, most of the important work happened before noon. May I help?" Mrs. Whitley assessed her for a moment, then smiled. "You can beat those eggs while I finish." The biscuits. Mr. Cooper likes his breakfast promptly at 7. As they worked together, Emma learned more about the household she would soon manage. Besides Mrs. Whitley, there was a young maid named Jenny who came in 3 times a week, a stable boy called Tobias, and of course, Frank Miller, who lived in a small cabin near the main barn. "What about Mr. Cooper's family?" Emma asked as she set the large oak table in the kitchen where, Mrs. Whitley explained, the staff and ranch hands typically ate. "Does he have any?" "Just his sister, Clara. She lives in Denver now, married to a banker, visits maybe once a year." Mrs. Whitley transferred biscuits to a serving plate. "Their parents died when they were young. Mr. Cooper raised her himself, working cattle drives to pay for her education." This glimpse into Jackson's past intrigued Emma. He must care for her deeply. "More than anything," Mrs. Whitley confirmed. "Only time I ever see him truly smile is when he gets a letter from Clara." She glanced at the clock. "You'd best set the dining room table now. Mr. Cooper will be in from his morning inspection soon." Emma found the formal dining room cold and unwelcoming in the morning light. She built up the fire in the fireplace, then located linen napkins and proper settings in a sideboard. As she worked, she considered how she might transform this sterile space into something warmer, more inviting. She was arranging coffee cups when Jackson Cooper entered, bringing with him the scent of cold air and leather. He paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to find her there. "Good morning, Mr. Cooper," Emma said calmly, continuing her task. "Miss Hayes." He removed his hat, revealing hair damp from snow. "I didn't expect to find you up so early." "I believe in starting as I mean to go on," she replied. "If I'm to manage this household, I should learn its rhythms." A flicker of what might have been approval crossed his face. "A practical approach. I am a practical woman, Mr. Cooper." He moved to the sideboard, where a stack of correspondence waited. "You should be aware that we have a visitor coming today. Victor Reynolds owns the neighboring ranch. He's been trying to buy part of my grazing land for years." Emma noted the tension in Jackson's voice. "And you don't wish to sell?" "The land he wants contains access to Silver Creek, the most reliable water source on my property. Without it, I'd be dependent on his goodwill during dry seasons." Jackson sorted through his letters with sharp, precise movements. "Reynolds is not a man I care to be indebted to." "I see." Jackson glanced up, studying her with those penetrating, your blue eyes. "Reynolds will likely join us for dinner. He'll be curious about you." "About your new wife, you mean?" Emma corrected gently. "Or soon-to-be wife." "Yes." He hesitated, then added, "Reynolds has a talent for using personal information as leverage. It would be best if you said as little as possible about your circumstances or our arrangement." Emma recognized the warning for what it was. This Victor. Reynolds was not merely a neighbor, but an adversary. "I understand." Mrs. Whitley entered with breakfast, and the conversation shifted to more neutral topics. The condition of the herds after the storm, repairs needed for fencing, supplies that would be required from town. Throughout the meal, Emma observed Jackson closely. He ate with the same efficiency that seemed to characterize everything he did. His movements economical, his attention never fully diverted from the mental calculations he seemed constantly to be making. "Your coffee is excellent," she commented, breaking a brief silence. He looked up, momentarily startled by the personal observation. "Yes, I import it from Brazil, one of my few indulgences." "Everyone should have at least one indulgence," Emma said, offering a small smile. Jackson studied her as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle. Then, to her surprise, his stern expression softened slightly. "And what is yours, Miss Hayes?" The question caught her off guard. "Books," she admitted. "Even during the worst years on the farm, I would save pennies to buy books when the traveling salesman came through." "What do you read?" "Everything. History, poetry, novels." Emma felt a flush rising to her cheeks under his intense focus. "My father believed education was important for everyone, including daughters. He taught me accounting so I could help with the farm ledgers." "An unusual perspective for a farmer," Jackson observed. "My father was an unusual man." A pang of grief struck her unexpectedly. He believed women's minds were just as capable as men's, merely trained to different purposes. "And do you share this belief?" "I've never found my gender to be a limitation to learning or understanding, Mr. Cooper, only to opportunity." Something shifted in his expression. Interest, perhaps, or reassessment. Before he could respond, Frank Miller appeared at the door, hat in hand. "Mr. Cooper, Reynolds is riding up with 2 of his men." Jackson's face immediately closed, all trace of their momentary connection vanishing. "So early. He's eager today." He stood, folding his napkin precisely. "Show them to my office, Frank. I'll be there shortly." After Frank left, Jackson turned to Emma. "Remember what I said about Reynolds. The less he knows about you, the better." "I understand." Emma rose as well. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to do while you're meeting with him?" Jackson considered this. "Simply continue familiarizing yourself with the house. Mrs. Whitley can show you the accounts and household inventories." He moved to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Hayes, thank you for understanding the unusual nature of our arrangement. Many women would find it objectionable." "I'm not many women, Mr. Cooper." A brief, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "No, I'm beginning to see that you are not." After he departed, Emma cleared the breakfast dishes, her mind turning over their conversation. For all his coldness and practicality, Jackson Cooper was not the unfeeling businessman she had initially judged him to be. There were depths there, carefully hidden beneath his controlled exterior. As she carried the dishes to the kitchen, voices drifted from the direction of Jackson's office, one deep and familiar, the other lighter, almost musical, yet with an undercurrent that raised the hair on Emma's arms. "The offer is more than generous, Cooper," the unfamiliar voice was saying. 50% above market value for a section of land you barely use. That land provides water access I can't afford. "To lose, Reynolds." Jackson's tone was firm. "As I've told you repeatedly." A soft laugh followed. "And yet, circumstances change, don't they? I hear congratulations are in order. Taking a wife, Cooper? How unexpected." Emma moved closer to the partially open door, telling herself she was merely gathering information about a man Jackson clearly considered a threat. "My personal affairs are not your concern, Reynolds." Jackson's voice had a dangerous edge now. "But they are interesting," Reynolds replied smoothly. "A mail-order bride, I understand? From some failed farm back east? Hardly the society match one might expect for a man of your position." Emma froze, hurt and anger flooding through her in equal measure. How did this man know the details of her circumstances? "My choice of wife is my business," Jackson stated coldly. "Now, if you have nothing new to discuss regarding land, always so direct," Reynolds sighed. "Very well, let me be equally direct. The railroad contract you're pursuing, I've submitted a competing bid. My sources tell me the decision-makers are leaning my way." "Your sources are mistaken." "Perhaps, but consider this, Cooper. With my water rights and your grazing land combined, we could present a unified front, split the contract, both prosper. I don't work with partners, Reynolds. You know this. Except now you have one, don't you? A wife is the ultimate partner. Wonder what the lovely Miss Hayes would think about your refusal to consider an offer that could secure both your futures. Women tend to be practical about such things." Emma had heard enough. She stepped away from the door, heart pounding. This Victor Reynolds was cleverly manipulative, and he somehow knew details about her that should have been private. More concerning, he seemed to view her as a potential lever to use against Jackson. She needed to understand the situation better before Saturday, before she legally bound herself to a man whose enemies were already circling, waiting for weakness. Emma spent the morning with Mrs. Whitley, reviewing household accounts and inventories, as Jackson had suggested. The housekeeper proved to be a font of information, not only about the practical operations of Evergreen Ranch, but also about the local personalities and politics. "Victor Reynolds," Mrs. Whitley's mouth puckered, as if she'd tasted something sour when Emma casually mentioned his visit. "That man's got the morals of a rattlesnake and twice the venom." "He seems to have a particular interest in Mr. Cooper's affairs," Emma observed, carefully recording figures in the household ledger. "Been that way for years." Reynolds came to Pine Ridge territory 5 years after Mr. Cooper, already wealthy from his father's railroad investments. "Thought he could buy up everything and everyone." Mrs. Whitley snorted. "Met his match in Mr. Cooper, who wouldn't sell an inch of evergreen no matter the price. And now there's a railroad contract at stake. Biggest opportunity this territory has seen in a generation. Whoever secures it will control beef prices all the way to Chicago." The housekeeper glanced at Emma curiously. "Mr. Cooper told you about that?" "Not exactly," Emma hedged. "I overheard some of their conversation." Mrs. Whitley nodded knowingly. "Reynolds would love nothing better than to ruin Mr. Cooper. It's personal for him. Mr. Cooper built everything through hard work, while Reynolds inherited his position. Can't stand that all his money can't buy him the respect Mr. Cooper has earned." This rivalry sounded more complex, and potentially more dangerous than Emma had initially understood. "How does Reynolds know about me? About my background?" Mrs. Whitley sighed, setting down the inventory list she'd been reviewing. "Pine Ridge isn't big enough to keep secrets, miss, and Reynolds pays for information. Likely had someone watching when you arrived yesterday, probably talked to the stagecoach driver." The implications were troubling. If Reynolds could so quickly gather intelligence about her arrival, what else might he discover? What might he already know about the true nature of her arrangement with Jackson? The rest of the day passed in a blur of domestic details. Emma met Jenny, the young maid, with quick eyes and a quicker smile. Tobias, the stable boy who couldn't be more than 16, but handled the horses with remarkable confidence. And several of the ranch hands who came to the kitchen for their midday meal. Jackson remained closeted in his office after Reynolds departed, emerging only briefly for lunch before disappearing again with account books and correspondence. Emma found herself oddly disappointed by his absence, realizing she had hoped to continue their breakfast conversation and perhaps gain more insight into the man she would soon marry. By late afternoon, restlessness drove her outside despite the cold. She bundled in her coat and a borrowed scarf from Mrs. Whitley, then set out to explore the immediate grounds of Evergreen Ranch. The snow crunched pleasantly beneath her boots as she walked the path between the main house and the largest barn. The mountains loomed in the distance, majestic against the clear blue sky, while the ranch buildings nestled in the valley like pieces carefully arranged on a game board. Emma could see why Jackson valued this land. It had a wild beauty that spoke to something deep inside her, something that recognized the promise and possibility of this rugged country. She was so absorbed in the landscape that she didn't notice Frank Miller approaching until he called her name. "Miss Hayes, didn't expect to see you out in this cold." Emma smiled at the foreman. "I needed some fresh air, and I wanted to see more of the ranch." Frank fell into step beside her. "Not much to see this time of year with the snow covering everything. But come spring, those fields will be green as emeralds. I look forward to it." Emma hesitated, then decided Frank might be her best source of unfiltered information. "Mr. Miller, may I ask you something about Mr. Cooper?" "Frank, remember? And you can ask, though I can't promise I'll answer." "Fair enough." Emma chose her words carefully. "This railroad contract that Mr. Cooper is pursuing, how important is it to Evergreen Ranch?" Frank gave her a sharp look. "Who told you about that?" "I overheard Mr. Reynolds mention it this morning." Frank sighed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. That man's got a loose tongue when it suits him. He was quiet for a moment, then continued. "The contract would mean everything to Evergreen. Regular income, guaranteed prices, expansion opportunities. Mr. Cooper's been working toward it for years, breeding the right stock, increasing the herd, improving the grasslands. And if he doesn't secure it, we'd survive," Frank said slowly. "But it would be a major setback. Might even force him to sell some of the land he's worked so hard to acquire." Emma digested this. "And his investors? The ones insisting on his marriage?" Frank's eyebrows shot up. "He told you about that?" "Mrs. Whitley did, actually." "Ah," Frank kicked at the snow thoughtfully. "Well, since you know, the investors are Eastern businessmen, friends of Mr. Cooper's brother-in-law. They've put up capital for the expansion necessary to fulfill the railroad contract. Conservative types who believe a family man is a better risk than a bachelor. So without their continued investment, the expansion stalls. The contract becomes impossible to fulfill." Frank shook his head. "It's not fair, but that's how these things work. Men with money make the rules." They had reached the large barn. Inside, Emma could hear the soft nickering of horses and the rustle of hay being distributed. The sense of leather, animals, and sweet feed mingled in the cold air. "Frank," a voice called from inside. "Need you to look at Thunderbolt's front." "Shoo!" "Coming," Frank called back. He turned to Emma with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls. Will you be all right finding your way back to the house?" "Of course. Thank you for the conversation." As Frank disappeared into the barn, Emma turned back toward the main house, her mind churning with new information. Jackson Cooper wasn't merely seeking a wife to satisfy old-fashioned investors. His entire operation, the work of 15 years, depended on securing their continued support and winning this railroad contract. And Victor Reynolds was determined to prevent both from happening. Emma had agreed to a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience, but she was beginning to understand that the stakes were far higher than she had initially realized. By Saturday, she wouldn't just be becoming Mrs. Jackson Cooper in name. She would be stepping into the middle of a bitter rivalry with consequences that could destroy everything Jackson had built. The question was, knowing this, did she still want to proceed? Emma returned to the house just as twilight was settling over the valley, painting the snow in shades of purple and blue. The warmth inside was a welcome relief after the biting cold, and she paused in the entryway to remove her borrowed scarf and coat. "There you are," Mrs. Whitley said, appearing from the direction of the kitchen. "I was beginning to worry. Dinner will be served in an hour." "Thank you. I'll be ready," Emma replied, her mind still preoccupied with everything she'd learned from Frank. "Mr. Cooper asked to see you in his study before dinner," Mrs. Whitley added, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Said it was important." Emma's pulse quickened. "I'll go to him now." The study was located at the rear of the house, a masculine sanctuary of leather-bound books, dark wood paneling, and a massive desk positioned to face the door. Jackson stood at the window when she entered, his tall frame silhouetted against the last light of day. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Emma was struck again by the intensity of his presence, how he seemed to fill any room he occupied, without effort. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged, "please sit down." Emma took the chair across from his desk, folding her hands in her lap to still their slight trembling. "Mrs. Whitley said you wanted to see me." Jackson remained standing, his posture rigid. "I believe we need to revisit our discussion from last night, specifically the terms of our arrangement." Emma's heart sank. Had he changed his mind? Decided she wasn't suitable after all? "I see," she managed, keeping her voice steady. "Reynolds' visit this morning has..." He paused, choosing his words with obvious care. "It has complicated matters. He knows more about your circumstances than I'm comfortable with, and he's already looking for ways to use our marriage against me." "Against us," Emma corrected gently. "If I become your wife, your concerns become mine as well." Jackson studied her with that penetrating gaze. "That's precisely what I wish to discuss. I proposed a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement between two practical people, but I now believe that arrangement may need to be more comprehensive than I initially suggested." "Comprehensive," Emma echoed, unsure of his meaning. Jackson moved to his desk, resting his hands on its polished surface. "Reynolds will be watching us closely, looking for any sign that our marriage is merely for show. Any hint of separate, lives under one roof of distance or formality between us will confirm his suspicions and potentially damage my standing with investors." Understanding dawned. "You're saying we need to present a more convincing appearance of a genuine marriage?" "Yes." Jackson looked uncomfortable but determined. "We must appear to be a united front, a true partnership in the eyes of Pine Ridge and my business associates." Emma considered the implications. This would require more than simply sharing a last name and occasionally appearing together in public. "It would," Jackson agreed, his expression carefully neutral. "It would mean shared quarters, regular appearances together in town, conducting ourselves in all ways as a devoted husband and wife." The suggestion of shared quarters sent heat rising. to Emma's cheeks, but she kept her composure. "I understand the necessity from a business perspective, Mr. Cooper, but such an arrangement would require additional considerations." "Such as?" "Trust," Emma said simply, "and mutual respect. If we are to convince others of a genuine union, we must first establish a foundation between ourselves that goes beyond legal documents." Jackson looked momentarily taken aback by her directness. "What do you propose?" "That we begin by using each other's given names, at least in private," Emma suggested. "That we make an effort to learn about each other beyond the practical necessities. That we establish habits of consultation and consideration that married couples naturally develop." Jackson considered this, then nodded slowly. "Your suggestions are sensible. What else?" Emma took a deep breath. "If we are to share quarters, as you suggest, there must be clear boundaries and expectations. I will not be treated as a convenience in that regard as well." A flush of color appeared high on Jackson's cheekbones, the first sign of discomposition she had seen in him. "I would never, Miss Hayes. Please understand that I'm suggesting appearances only. I have no intention of taking advantage of our arrangement in that manner." "I believe you," Emma assured him, oddly touched by his evident discomfort. "But these things should be stated explicitly to avoid misunderstandings." "Agreed." Jackson seemed relieved to return to the familiar territory of clear terms. "Then let us establish this. We will present ourselves to the world as a devoted couple. In private, we will work toward a partnership based on mutual respect and common goals. Physical intimacies are not expected nor required as part of our arrangement, and the matter of children," Emma pressed, returning to the question she had raised the previous evening. Jackson's expression grew troubled. "That is more complex." "But necessary to address," Emma insisted gently. "A marriage without children would eventually raise questions, particularly in a community like Pine Ridge." Jackson moved away from the desk, pacing to the fireplace, where embers glowed softly in the gathering darkness. For a long moment, he stared into the coals, as if seeking answers there. "I have always assumed I would have no children," he finally said, his voice so low Emma had to strain to hear him. "My work, the ranch, they have been my only focus for so long." "And now?" He turned to face her, something vulnerable flickering beneath his controlled exterior. "If our arrangement proves successful, if we establish a true partnership as you describe, then perhaps in time we might revisit the question." It wasn't a direct answer, but Emma recognized the concession it represented. Jackson Cooper was not a man who admitted uncertainty easily. "That seems reasonable," she acknowledged. "We can build our partnership first and determine other matters when we are both comfortable doing so." Relief crossed Jackson's features, quickly masked. "Then we are agreed on the revised terms?" "Almost," Emma said, rising from her chair to stand before him. "There is one more thing." "Yes?" "I would like to be included in matters concerning the ranch and your business interests," she stated firmly, "not merely as a decorative wife to impress investors, but as a true partner who understands and contributes to Evergreen's success." Jackson's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You wish to be involved in the ranching business?" "I grew up on a farm, Mr. Cooper." "Jackson," she corrected herself. "I understand agricultural economics, weather patterns, crop rotation, and animal husbandry. I kept my father's books for years and managed our household budget through drought and hardship. I believe I can offer valuable insights." For the first time, Jackson seemed to truly see her, not as a solution to his investor problem or a necessary addition to his household, but as a person with abilities and knowledge of her own. "I've underestimated you, Emma Hayes," he said, slowly. testing her given name with careful precision. "Most people do," she replied with a small smile. "I've learned to use that to my advantage." Unexpectedly, Jackson smiled back, a genuine expression that transformed his stern features and sparked something warm in Emma's chest. "I believe you and I may work well together after all." "I believe we might," Emma agreed, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the subtle scent of his shaving soap and the surprising softness in his eyes. The moment stretched between them, fragile and uncharted, until a knock at the door broke the spell. "Mr. Cooper?" Mrs. Whitley called. "Dinner is ready to be served." Jackson stepped back, his expression returning to its usual composure. "We'll be right there, Mrs. Whitley." As the housekeeper's footsteps receded, Jackson offered Emma his arm in a gesture that seemed both formal and newly meaningful after their conversation. "Shall we, Emma?" She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his jacket. "Yes, Jackson, I believe we shall." Dinner that evening was different, not in the food or setting, but in the subtle shift between them. Jackson made visible efforts to include Emma in conversation, asking her opinions on various topics and actually listening to her responses. Emma, for her part, began testing the boundaries of their new understanding, using his given name occasionally and offering personal observations that went beyond mere pleasantries. Mrs. Whitley noticed the change immediately, her knowing glances shifting between them as she served each course. By the time she brought coffee and apple pie for dessert, Jackson had abandoned his position at the head of the table to sit in the chair adjacent to Emma's, their heads bent close as he described the seasonal rhythms of ranching in Wyoming territory. "Spring is the busiest time," he explained, unconsciously gesturing with his coffee cup. "Calving season demands constant attention. We work in shifts to monitor the herd day and night." "Similar to lambing on our farm," Emma noted. "My father and I would take turns sleeping in the barn during the coldest weeks." Jackson seemed genuinely interested. "You assisted with the birthing process?" "Of course. We couldn't afford to hire extra hands, so everyone did everything." Emma smiled at the memory. "My mother said I delivered my first lamb when I was 9 years old. The ewe was having difficulty, and my hands were smaller than my father's." "Remarkable," Jackson murmured, and Emma felt a flush of pleasure at the admiration in his voice. As Mrs. Whitley cleared away the dessert plates, Jackson's expression grew more serious. "There's another matter we should discuss before Saturday, the wedding itself. I assumed it would be a simple ceremony, as you mentioned." "Yes, but there are details to consider." He leaned back slightly, his posture reflective. "If we're to present a convincing marriage to the community, we should invite at least some witnesses. Frank, Mrs. Whitley, and a few of the senior ranch hands, perhaps." Emma nodded. "That seems appropriate." "And there's the matter of rings," Jackson continued. "I have my mother's wedding ring. It's a simple gold band, nothing elaborate, but it's been in the family for generations." The unexpected sentimentality of this gesture caught Emma by surprise. "You would want me to wear your mother's ring?" "If you're comfortable with it," Jackson said cautiously. "It would add credibility to our union." "It would," Emma agreed, touched despite her practical nature. "I would be honored to wear it." Jackson nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. That's settled then." An idea occurred to Emma. "Since we're discussing appearances, should we perhaps mention our marriage in the Pine Ridge newspaper? A small announcement would be expected for a rancher of your standing." "Astute observation," Jackson agreed. "I'll have Frank ride into town tomorrow to arrange it." Emma hesitated, then added, "And perhaps we should include how we met. Not the advertisement, of course, but a plausible story to explain our rapid courtship." Jackson's eyebrows rose. "What would you suggest?" We could say we corresponded for several months after being introduced through your sister Clara's connections in Denver, Emma proposed. It's close enough to the truth to be maintainable, distant enough to be difficult to verify, and explains why few people in Pine Ridge knew of me before my arrival. A look of genuine admiration crossed Jackson's face. You have a strategic mind, Emma Hayes. I prefer to think of it as practical foresight, she replied with a small smile. If we're to convince others of our union, we should have our stories aligned from the beginning. Agreed. Jackson checked his pocket watch. It's getting late. I have some correspondence to finish before retiring. Emma rose from her chair. Then I'll bid you good night. Jackson stood as well, suddenly seeming uncertain. Then, in a gesture that appeared almost impulsive for such a controlled man, he took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips in a formal but surprisingly affecting gesture. Good night, Emma. Good night, Emma. Sleep well. The unexpected gallantry left Emma momentarily speechless. By the time she collected herself, Jackson had already turned toward his study, leaving her with the lingering warmth of his touch on her skin and a peculiar flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with their business arrangement. The following day dawned even colder than the last, with frost patterns etching delicate designs on Emma's bedroom window. She dressed quickly in her everyday gown and made her way downstairs, where she found Jackson already at the breakfast table, newspaper in hand. Good morning, she greeted him, momentarily hesitant about their new familiarity. He looked up, his expression more relaxed than she had yet seen it. Good morning, Emma. Did you sleep well? Yes, thank you. She settled into what was becoming her usual chair. You're up early. Ranch work doesn't accommodate late risers, he replied, setting aside his newspaper. I've already been to the north pasture to check on the herd. Mrs. Whitley appeared with coffee and hot cereal, her eyes twinkling with evident approval at their morning conversation. Beautiful day out there despite the cold, she observed. Skies as blue as a robin's egg. Frank's riding into town after breakfast, Jackson informed Emma, as he doctored his coffee with a precision that made her smile inwardly. He'll place the announcement in the newspaper as we discussed and pick up some supplies. Is there anything specific you need from Pine Ridge? The thoughtful inquiry, so domestic and considerate, caught Emma by surprise. That's kind of you to ask. Perhaps some thread if it's not too much trouble. I noticed some mending that could be done around the house. Jackson nodded. I'll tell Frank. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the blink of spoons against bowls and the distant voices of ranch hands beginning their day's work outside. I've been thinking about our discussion last night, Jackson said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup. About your involvement in ranch matters. Yes? Emma prompted when he paused. I have ledgers from the past year that could use reviewing. Before my meeting with the bank next week, if you're genuinely interested, I thought perhaps you might look them over. His tone was carefully neutral, but Emma recognized the offer for what it was, a test of her abilities and a tentative step toward real partnership. I'd be happy to, she replied, trying to contain her eagerness. When would you like me to start? After breakfast, if you have time. They're in my study. He hesitated, then added, I should warn you that my bookkeeping system is somewhat idiosyncratic. Emma smiled. All systems are idiosyncratic when they reflect one person's thought process. I'm sure I can adapt. A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's lips. You continue to surprise me, Emma Hayes. Good, she replied simply. I find life is more interesting when it contains elements of surprise, don't you? Before Jackson could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Frank Miller appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression troubled. Sorry to interrupt breakfast, Mr. Cooper, but there's a situation in town you should know about. Jackson immediately shifted from relaxed breakfast companion to alert rancher. What kind of situation? Frank glanced at Emma, clearly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should discuss it privately, sir. Emma and I have no secrets, Frank, Jackson stated firmly, surprising both Emma and the foreman. Whatever concerns Evergreen Ranch concerns her as well. Frank nodded, accepting this new dynamic, without comment. Victor Reynolds has filed a formal complaint with the town council, claiming your north fence line encroaches on his property by nearly 50 feet. He's demanding a survey and compensation. Jackson's jaw tightened. That fence line has been in the same location for 12 years. Reynolds knows that perfectly well. Yes, sir, but he's found a surveyor from Cheyenne who's willing to support his claim. And with Judge Patterson currently serving as head of the town council. Peterson is in Reynolds' pocket, Jackson finished grimly. Of course. Emma watched the exchange with growing concern. What would this encroachment claim mean, practically speaking? Both men turned to her, Frank appearing surprised by her direct question, while Jackson seemed to appreciate it. If successful, Jackson explained, it would force me to move the fence at considerable expense and inconvenience. More importantly, it would cast doubt on all my property boundaries, potentially opening the door to further challenges. It's also suspicious timing, Frank added. That section of fence runs alongside the very land Reynolds has been trying to buy, the parcel with Silver Creek access. So this is leverage, Emma concluded. Another attempt to force you to sell. Precisely, Jackson's expression was grim. And to distract me from preparations for the railroad contract proposal, which must be submitted in 3 weeks. Emma considered this. When does the town council meet to hear the complaint? Tuesday, Frank replied. 4 days from now. Jackson pushed back from the table, decision made. Frank, ride into town and find out everything you can about this surveyor from Cheyenne. I want to know who he is, who he's worked for previously, and what his relationship might be to Reynolds. Yes, sir. Frank turned to leave, then paused. And the newspaper announcement, still want me to place it? Jackson glanced at Emma, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, he confirmed. In fact, make sure it's prominent. Emma and I will be married Saturday as planned. Perhaps you could also mention it to a few people around town. Frank's weathered face broke into a rare smile. Be my pleasure, Mr. Cooper. After Frank departed, Jackson remained standing, energy radiating from his tall frame. Reynolds moves faster than I anticipated. I shouldn't be surprised. He's obviously determined, Emma observed, and ruthless. Jackson looked at her, his expression troubled. Emma, I want to be clear about something. By marrying me, you're stepping into a complicated situation with a man who doesn't hesitate to use any advantage. Are you certain you wish to proceed? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications. Emma could still walk away, return to the stagecoach, and whatever uncertain future awaited her elsewhere. Jackson was offering her an out, a chance to reconsider before becoming entangled in his battles. Emma studied his face. The strong, determined lines, the intelligence in his blue eyes, the evident concern for her welfare despite their brief acquaintance. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the desperate circumstances that had brought her to Pine Ridge, and the unexpected opportunity that now stood before her. Yes, Jackson, she said with quiet conviction. I'm certain your challenges become mine on Saturday as mine become yours. That's what partnership means. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, relief, respect, and perhaps a flicker of something deeper. Thank you, he said simply. Now, Emma continued practically, you mentioned ledgers that need reviewing? The transition back to business seemed to ground Jackson. Yes, in my study. I'll show you. Jackson's study reflected his personality, orderly, purposeful, with a place for everything and everything in its place. The large oak desk dominated the room, its surface arranged with military precision, inkwell and pens to the right, correspondence, sorted into neat piles, a leather-bound calendar centered perfectly. "The ledgers are here," Jackson said, opening a cabinet behind the desk to reveal a row of identical books, each labeled by year. "The current one is on my desk." Emma approached, glancing at the open ledger with professional interest. As Jackson had warned, his bookkeeping system was indeed idiosyncratic, a combination of standard accounting methods and personal notations that would be indecipherable to most. "I see what you mean about your system," she commented, running a finger down a column of figures. "You use your own shorthand for recurring expenses." Jackson looked surprised. "You can make sense of it already?" "My father did something similar," Emma explained. "He created symbols for different types of expenditures. Yours are different, of course, but the principle is the same." She pointed to a notation. "This means fence repair, doesn't it? And this on his feed purchase." "Remarkable," Jackson murmured. "It took Mrs. Whitley months to decipher my abbreviations, and even Frank still struggles with some of them." Emma smiled, pleased by his evident admiration. "Everyone's mind organizes information differently. The trick is finding the pattern." She turned the page, noting a significant outlay. "This was the expansion you mentioned. The one funded by your investors?" "Yes. Additional grazing land to the west, improvements to the existing pastures, breeding stock purchased from back east." Jackson moved closer, his shoulder nearly touching hers as he pointed to various entries. "The railroad contract would require us to provide 3 times our current capacity. These expenditures position us to meet that demand." Emma nodded, absorbing both the information and his proximity. "And if you don't secure the contract?" Jackson's expression grew serious. "Then Evergreen Ranch faces significant debt with reduced means to service it. Not immediate failure, but a precarious position that would take years to recover from." "I understand." Emma turned to face him directly. "What can I do to help ensure you win the contract?" Jackson seemed taken aback by her directness, but his eyes warmed with appreciation. "Your willingness to help is unexpected, but welcome. We're to be partners, remember?" Emma reminded him gently. "Your success is mine. Your concerns are mine." For a moment, Jackson simply looked at her, as if seeing something new and valuable that had been hidden in plain sight. Then he nodded decisively. "The railroad representatives will be visiting Pine Ridge in 2 weeks to meet the final candidates. They'll spend an evening at each ranch, evaluating not just our operations, but our stability and reliability." He hesitated, then added, "Having a well-established household, a family presence, will work in our favor. Then, by the time they arrive, we should present the picture of a harmonious and efficient partnership," Emma concluded. "A ranch that runs smoothly from pasture to parlor." "Exactly." Jackson's expression brightened with new determination. "Reynolds has his wealth and connections, but he runs his operation like a distant emperor, through managers and foremen. Evergreen is different. It's personal, hands-on. We can emphasize that advantage." Emma felt a surge of purpose. This was something tangible she could contribute to, a clear goal that aligned with both their interests. "I'll need to understand every aspect of the ranch's operations," she said thoughtfully. "Perhaps tomorrow you could show me more of the property. I've only seen the immediate surroundings so far." "Of course." Jackson appeared pleased by her initiative. "Weather permitting, we could ride out after breakfast." "That would be perfect." Emma turned back to the ledger, already formulating strategies to organize the information more efficiently. "In the meantime, I'll familiarize myself with these figures and prepare some analyses that might be useful for your bank meeting." Jackson watched her for a moment longer, an unreadable expression on his face. Then he straightened, returning to his usual businesslike demeanor. "I have work to attend to in the barn. Will you be comfortable here?" "Quite comfortable," Emma assured him, already absorbed in the columns of numbers that told the story of Evergreen Ranch in their own mathematical language. Left alone in Jackson's study, Emma lost herself in the work that had always brought her satisfaction, finding patterns in figures, bringing order to financial information, identifying opportunities for efficiency. The morning passed quickly as she familiarized herself with Jackson's record-keeping system and began making notes for potential improvements. By the time Mrs. Whitley appeared to announce lunch, Emma had developed a clearer picture of Evergreen Ranch's financial health. Jackson had built an impressive operation, growing methodically over 15 years with relatively little debt until the recent expansion. His management was conservative but forward-thinking, investing in quality breeding stock and land improvements rather than flashy purchases. It was the approach of a man who understood that true wealth came from patient building rather than speculative gambles. "You've been busy," Mrs. Whitley observed, noting the papers spread across the desk. "Mr. Cooper doesn't usually let anyone touch his precious ledgers." Emma smiled, gathering her notes. "We're to be partners. Understanding the ranch's finances is part of that." Mrs. Whitley's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Partners, is it? Well, that's a step up from yesterday's arrangement." Emma felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Our circumstances haven't changed, Mrs. Whitley. We're simply being practical about making the best of them." The housekeeper replied skeptically, "And that's why he was asking me this morning whether you prefer roses or wildflowers." "He what?" Emma's composure slipped momentarily. Mrs. Whitley's smile widened. "For the wedding, said even a simple ceremony should have some touches that would please a bride." She bustled around the study, straightening books Jackson had left on a side table. "In 15 years, I've never seen Jackson Cooper concern himself with what might please a woman. Practical indeed." Emma didn't know how to respond to this revelation. The idea that Jackson had specifically considered what might make their business-like ceremony more pleasant for her seemed at odds with his pragmatic approach to their arrangement. "What did you tell him?" she asked finally. "That any woman who chose farming over fancy living would probably prefer wildflowers to hothouse roses," Mrs. Whitley replied. "Was I right?" Emma nodded, oddly touched. "Yes, you were right." "Thought so." Mrs. Whitley moved toward the door. "Lunch is ready whenever you are. Mr. Cooper said he'd be in shortly." Left alone again, Emma found herself standing before the window that overlooked the ranch yard, watching as men moved between buildings with purpose, their breath visible in the cold air. Somewhere out there, Jackson Cooper was working alongside them, the same man who had coolly proposed a business arrangement 2 days ago and who was now asking about flower preferences. What kind of marriage would they build from these contradictory beginnings? Could genuine feeling grow from practical necessity? Emma had never been one for romantic fantasies, but she couldn't deny the subtle shift that was already occurring between them. Small moments of connection, glimpses of the man. Beneath the stern exterior, unexpected considerations that went beyond mere business. Saturday was rapidly approaching, bringing with it a future Emma could never have imagined when she stepped off the stagecoach. Whether that future held merely security or something more remained to be seen. For now, she would focus on what she could control, learning Evergreen Ranch, preparing for the railroad representatives, and presenting herself as the capable partner Jackson Cooper needed to secure his legacy. And perhaps in the process, discovering if there might be more to their arrangement than either of them had initially intended. Saturday arrived with a clarity of sky that seemed like nature's blessing on the day. Emma woke early, watching dawn break over the mountains from her bedroom window. The last morning she would wake in this room as Emma Hayes, By sunset, she would be Emma Cooper, mistress of Evergreen Ranch, and wife to a man who remained in many ways a mystery to her. The past 2 days had passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Jackson had taken her on a tour of the ranch, riding side by side across snow-covered pastures as he explained his vision for Evergreen's future. Emma had been impressed by both the scope of his operation and his evident passion for the land, which emerged in rare moments when his practical exterior gave way to genuine feeling. "This ridge," he had told her, reining his horse to a stop at a vantage point overlooking the valley, "is where I stood 15 years ago and decided this would be my home. Everything you see, every fence post, every building, every improvement to the land began with that moment." The pride in his voice had touched something in Emma, a recognition of what it meant to build something from nothing, to pour one's life force into creating a legacy. Now, as she prepared for the day ahead, Emma found herself unusually contemplative. Her wedding day, not as she had once imagined it perhaps, but significant nonetheless. She laid out her blue dress, freshly pressed by Mrs. Whitley, and the small pearl earrings that had been her mother's, her only inheritance and most treasured possession. A knock at the door interrupted her preparations. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Whitley with morning coffee. Instead, Jackson stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. He was already dressed in what was clearly his finest suit, charcoal grey wool with a subtle pattern, a crisp white shirt, and a silver brocade waistcoat that brought out the blue of his eyes. "Good morning," he said, remaining on the threshold as if uncertain of his welcome. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Emma assured him, suddenly conscious of her morning wrapper and loosely braided hair. Jackson seemed momentarily distracted by her appearance before collecting himself. "I have something for you, a wedding gift of sorts." He extended a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. Emma took it carefully, surprised by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful. I didn't expect—" "Open it," Jackson urged gently. Inside, nestled on dark blue velvet, lay a delicate gold chain supporting a teardrop-shaped pendant of pale blue topaz surrounded by tiny pearls. "Jackson," Emma breathed, genuinely touched. "It's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he explained, his deep voice softer than usual. "Clara has her more elaborate jewelry, but this always seemed to embody a quiet elegance that reminded me of you." The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Emma's cheeks. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll wear it today," Jackson suggested. "It would complement your eyes." Emma nodded, moved by both the gift and the personal sentiment behind it. "I would be honored." They stood in silence for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement perhaps that what had begun as a business arrangement was evolving into something neither had anticipated. "Frank returned from town late last night," Jackson said finally, shifting back to more familiar territory. "The announcement is in this morning's newspaper, and he reports considerable interest among the townspeople. Several even expressed disappointment at not being invited to the ceremony." "We could always hold a reception later," Emma suggested, "once we're more established as a couple." Jackson considered this. A practical solution to maintain community and goodwill. "We can discuss the details after the railroad contract is secured." Always the businessman, Emma thought, though with more fondness than criticism. "What time will Judge Patterson arrive?" 4 o'clock. Mrs. Whitley is preparing a special dinner afterward for our small group of witnesses." Jackson hesitated, then added, "I've taken the liberty of having the blue guest room prepared for you to use today. More space for your preparations than your current accommodations." The consideration surprised Emma. "Thank you." "I'll leave you to your morning," Jackson said with a small bow. "Mrs. Whitley has breakfast whenever you're ready." After he departed, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the jewelry box open in her hands. The necklace represented something beyond monetary value, a family heirloom, a connection to Jackson's past, a sign that he viewed their union as more than mere convenience. Whether he fully recognized this himself remained unclear, but the gesture gave Emma a flutter of hope that their partnership might grow into something genuine. When she finally went downstairs, wearing her everyday dress and with her hair properly arranged, Emma found the house transformed. Mrs. Whitley had been busy since dawn, decorating the main parlor with winter greenery and white ribbons. The dining table was already partially set for the evening meal, fine china and crystal catching the morning light. "There you are," Mrs. Whitley greeted her warmly. "I was about to bring up a tray. Thought you might want to eat in the blue room while I move your things." "That's very kind, but I'm happy to help with the preparations," Emma replied. "It seems you've been working since first light." Mrs. Whitley beamed with pride. "Mr. Cooper said to make everything perfect, even if it's just a small gathering. First wedding at Evergreen Ranch deserves proper celebration," he said. Emma felt that now familiar warmth spreading through her chest. Another unexpected consideration from the man she had initially judged to be coldly practical. "Where is Mr. Cooper now?" she asked, accepting a cup of coffee from the housekeeper. "Rode out early with Frank to check the north fence line. The one that Reynolds is disputing. Said they'd be back by noon." Mrs. Whitley set a plate of eggs and bacon before Emma. "Jenny's coming in an hour to help with the cleaning. I've sent Tobias to gather pine boughs from the foothills. They smell so lovely in winter." "It sounds like you have everything well in hand," Emma observed, genuinely impressed by the housekeeper's efficiency. "Been waiting 15 years to see this place become a proper home," Mrs. Whitley said matter-of-factly. "Even if the circumstances are unusual, it's a day worth marking." Emma ate quickly, then insisted on helping with the remaining preparations. The physical work helped calm her growing nervousness as the hours ticked closer to 4 o'clock. By early afternoon, the house was spotless. The dining room arranged for a celebratory meal and the parlor transformed into a fitting space for a wedding ceremony. At 2 o'clock, Mrs. Whitley shooed Emma upstairs to begin her preparations. "Jenny's heated water for your bath, and I've pressed your blue dress. Take your time now. A bride should be relaxed on her wedding day." A bride. The word still felt foreign to Emma, associated with romantic notions she had long since set aside as impractical. Yet here she was, preparing to become Mrs. Jackson Cooper in a ceremony that, while small and hastily arranged, was beginning to feel surprisingly meaningful. The hot bath was a luxury Emma rarely indulged in, and she allowed herself to soak until the water cooled, letting the warmth ease the tension from her muscles. Afterward, she dried her hair by the fire in the blue guest room, brushing it until it shone like polished mahogany in the afternoon light. Mrs. Whitley appeared as Emma was putting the finishing touches on her hair, arranging it in a simple but elegant style with soft curls framing her face. "You look lovely," the housekeeper declared. "Now for the final touches." She helped Emma into the blue dress, skillfully fastening the row of tiny buttons that ran down the back. The dress was simple by fashionable standards, but well-made and flattering, emphasizing Emma's slender waist and bringing out the deep blue of her eyes. "Here, let me," Mrs. Whitley offered as Emma reached for her mother's pearl earrings. Once they were in place, the housekeeper stepped back to assess the effect. "Beautiful. Now for the necklace Mr. Cooper gave you." Emma was surprised. "How did you know about that?" Mrs. Whitley smiled knowingly. "He asked my advice on whether you'd like it. Showed it to me yesterday after he had Frank retrieve it from the bank vault in town. The revelation that Jackson had been planning this gift had specifically sought advice about whether it would please her touched Emma deeply. Mrs. Whitley fastened the delicate chain around Emma's neck, adjusting the topaz pendant to rest perfectly at the hollow of her throat. "There!" Perfect, like it was made for you. Emma studied her reflection in the dressing table mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed transformed, not just by the fine dress or carefully arranged hair, but by something less tangible, a quiet confidence and sense of purpose that hadn't been there when she arrived at Evergreen Ranch less than a week ago. "It's nearly time," Mrs. Whitley announced after consulting her watch. "Mr. Cooper has returned and is getting ready in his room. Judge Patterson should arrive any minute." Emma's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Whitley, may I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "Do you think—" Emma hesitated, uncertain how to frame the question. "Do you think this arrangement can become something genuine? Something more than a practical solution to our respective problems?" The housekeeper's expression softened. "I've known Jackson Cooper for 15 years, watched him build this ranch from nothing, seen him face challenges that would break most men. In all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." "What way is that?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper, like a man who's discovered something precious he never knew he was missing. Mrs. Whitley patted Emma's hand. "Give it time, dear. The best partnerships start with respect and grow from there." Before Emma could respond, the sound of an approaching carriage reached them through the open window. Judge Patterson had arrived. "Time to go," Mrs. Whitley said, giving Emma's appearance one final assessment. "Remember to breathe. Even practical weddings deserve a moment of celebration." Downstairs, the small gathering of witnesses had assembled. In the parlor, Frank Miller looking uncomfortable but dignified in his Sunday suit, Jenny the maid wide-eyed with excitement, Tobias the stable boy with his hair slicked down, 3 senior ranch hands standing awkwardly by the fireplace, and Judge Patterson, a portly man with spectacles and an air of official dignity. And waiting at the front of the room, tall and imposing in his formal attire, stood Jackson Cooper. Emma paused at the entrance, momentarily struck by the tableau, the decorated parlor, the assembled witnesses, and most of all, the man who would momentarily become her husband. He turned as she appeared, and for once his carefully controlled expression failed him. The open admiration in Jackson's eyes as he beheld her sent a wave of warmth through Emma's entire body. Not merely appreciation for her appearance, but something deeper, respect, wonder, and perhaps the beginning of genuine affection. Mrs. Whitley gave her a gentle nudge. "Go on, dear. Don't keep him waiting." Emma moved forward, suddenly conscious of every step, every breath. This was not the wedding she had imagined as a young girl, but as she approached Jackson and saw the warmth in his usually guarded eyes, she found herself unexpectedly moved by the moment. "You look beautiful," Jackson murmured as she took her place beside him, his deep voice pitched for her ears alone. "Thank you," she whispered back. "You're quite handsome yourself." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before he turned to face Judge Patterson. The ceremony was brief and traditional, with the standard vows of love, honor, and cherish. Emma felt a momentary awkwardness at these promises, made in the context of their practical arrangement. But as she looked into Jackson's eyes while speaking, the words, she found herself meaning them more sincerely than she had expected. When Jackson placed his mother's gold band on her finger, a perfect fit as if meant for her, his hand lingered on hers, strong and warm. And when Judge Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson's kiss, though brief and proper given, their audience contained a gentleness that stirred something unexpected in Emma's heart. "May I present Mr. and Mrs. Jackson Cooper," Judge Patterson announced to the small gathering, his voice carrying the official weight of his position. Frank was the first to offer congratulations, pumping Jackson's hand vigorously before giving Emma a respectful bow. "Welcome to the family of Evergreen Ranch, Mrs. Cooper." "Mrs. Cooper." Emma turned the name over in her mind, recognizing both its strangeness and its rightness. Whatever unusual circumstances had brought them to this moment, she was now legally and publicly bound to Jackson Cooper and the future of Evergreen Ranch. The celebratory dinner that followed was more festive than Emma had anticipated. Mrs. Whitley had outdone herself, preparing roast beef, mashed potatoes with cream, fresh rolls, and winter vegetables preserved from the fall harvest. A special cake, decorated with crystallized sugar, completed the feast, accompanied by bottles of champagne Jackson had apparently ordered specially for the occasion. Throughout the meal, Emma observed her new husband with growing curiosity. Away from the pressure of business concerns, surrounded by the people who formed his extended family of sorts, Jackson revealed glimpses of a different man, one who could laugh at Frank's dry jokes, who knew each ranch hand's family circumstances, who treated the young stable boy Tobias with the patient regard of a mentor rather than merely an employer. "A toast," Frank proposed as Mrs. Whitley served the cake, raising his champagne glass. "To Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, may Evergreen Ranch flourish under their partnership for many years to come." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, glasses clinking. Jackson turned to Emma, his expression warmer than she had yet seen it. "To new beginnings," he said quietly, touching his glass to hers. "To partnerships," she responded with a small smile, noting the approval in his eyes at her choice of words. As the evening progressed, Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the company and conversation. These people who had initially been strangers were now her household, her extended family of sorts. Their evident loyalty to Jackson spoke volumes about his character, despite his reserved exterior. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Judge Patterson took his leave, citing the cold journey back to town. The ranch hands departed shortly after, returning to their quarters near the barn. "I should see to the dishes," Mrs. Whitley said, beginning to clear the table. "Leave them until morning," Jackson instructed her, surprising both the housekeeper and Emma with this departure from routine. "You've worked hard enough today. The celebration was perfect." Mrs. Whitley beamed at the praise. "Very well, Mr. Cooper. I'll just bank the fires and retire then." "I should turn in as well," Frank added, sensing the newlyweds might want privacy. "Big day tomorrow. Those calves in the south pasture need checking." Within minutes, the house grew quiet, leaving Emma and Jackson alone in the parlor where they had exchanged vows hours earlier. An unexpected awkwardness settled between them, the practiced ease of their public performance giving way to the reality of their new situation. "Would you care for coffee?" Jackson offered, clearly searching for a safe topic. "Or perhaps something stronger?" "Coffee would be lovely," Emma replied, grateful for the momentary reprieve. Jackson moved to the kitchen and returned minutes later with 2 steaming cups. He handed one to Emma, then took a seat in the armchair opposite hers rather than on the sofa beside her, maintaining a respectful distance that both relieved and oddly disappointed her. "Today went well," he observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Judge Patterson seemed convinced of our attachment." "Yes," Emma agreed. "Everyone was very kind." They sipped their coffee in silence for a moment before Jackson spoke again, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Emma, I want to address our arrangements for the evening." The delicate subject brought heat to Emma's cheeks, despite her determined practicality. "Yes, of course. I've had your things moved to the master bedroom as we discussed," Jackson continued, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup rather than her face. "For appearance's sake when Mrs. Whitley or others are present, but I've prepared the adjoining dressing room with a comfortable bed for myself. Your privacy will be respected." Emma nodded, a conflicting mixture of relief and something like disappointment washing over her. "Thank you. That's very considerate." "We agreed this would be a marriage of partnership and mutual benefit," Jackson reminded her, finally meeting her eyes. I intend to honor both the letter and spirit of our arrangement. As do I, Emma assured him, though a small voice in her mind whispered that their arrangement had already evolved beyond its original parameters in ways neither had anticipated. Jackson set aside his coffee cup and stood, his tall frame silhouetted against the fireplace. "It's getting late, perhaps we should retire." Emma rose as well, suddenly very aware of the intimacy implied in the suggestion, despite Jackson's reassurances. "Yes, I suppose we should." They ascended the staircase together, their footsteps echoing in the quiet house. The master bedroom was located at the end of the hallway, its double doors imposing in the dim light of the wall sconces. Jackson paused outside the doors, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "Emma, I want you to know that I appreciate your willingness to enter this arrangement. Today was more meaningful than I had anticipated." The confession, offered with uncharacteristic vulnerability, touched Emma deeply. "For me as well," she admitted softly. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a warming, a softening of his usual reserve. Slowly, telegraphing his intentions to give her time to withdraw, he reached for her hand. When she didn't pull away, he raised it to his lips in a gesture, reminiscent of their early courtship. "Good night, Mrs. Cooper," he said, his deep voice rumbling through her like distant thunder. "Good night, Mr. Cooper," she replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. Jackson opened the bedroom door for her, then stepped back to allow her to enter alone. The master bedroom was spacious and handsomely appointed, with a large four-poster bed as its centerpiece. A fire burned in the grate, casting golden light across polished wood and rich fabrics. Emma's few possessions had been arranged carefully on the dressing table, her nightgown laid out across the turned-down bed. A door in the far wall presumably led to the dressing room Jackson had mentioned. As if reading her thoughts, he gestured toward it. "My room is through there. If you need anything during the night, you have only to knock." Emma nodded, strangely affected by his proximity in this most private of spaces. "Thank you." Jackson hesitated a moment longer, as if there were more he wished to say. Then he simply nodded, stepped back, and closed the door quietly behind him. Alone in what was now her bedroom, Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She moved to the dressing table, removing her mother's pearl earrings and carefully placing them in their small box. As she reached for the clasp of the necklace Jackson had given her, her fingers trembled slightly. Today she had become Mrs. Jackson Cooper, legally, publicly, irrevocably. She had gained security, position, and purpose, but she had also stepped into a complex web of rivalries and ambitions that threatened the very security she sought. And most complicated of all, she had found herself increasingly drawn to the reserved, complicated man who was now her husband. A man whose carefully constructed walls seemed to be slowly, incrementally lowering in her presence. Emma changed into her nightgown and slipped between the cool sheets of the massive bed, acutely aware of its emptiness. Despite the practical nature of their arrangement, despite the reassurance of boundaries and separate spaces, she found herself wondering what might have been if their marriage had been born of genuine affection rather than mutual necessity. Sleep was slow in coming, her mind filled with images from the day. Jackson's expression when he first saw her in her wedding attire, the warmth of his hand as he placed the ring on her finger, the unexpected gentleness of his goodnight kiss. Small moments that suggested possibilities beyond their practical arrangement. When Emma finally drifted into slumber, her dreams were filled with wildflowers and topaz skies, and a tall figure whose face remained in shadow, yet felt inexplicably familiar, as if she had always known him and was only now remembering. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight filtering through the curtains and the distant sounds of ranch activity already underway. For a moment, Emma lay disoriented, unfamiliar with her surroundings. Then the events of the previous day rushed back. The ceremony, the celebration, the awkward goodnight at her bedroom door. She was Mrs. Jackson Cooper now, mistress of Evergreen Ranch. Rising, she moved to the window and pulled back the curtains to reveal a landscape transformed by overnight snow, fresh powder coating every surface, turning the ranch into a pristine wonderland. Ranch hands were already at work, clearing paths between buildings, their breath visible in the cold air. Emma dressed quickly in her everyday gown, arranging her hair in a simple style appropriate for a working day. As she fastened Jackson's necklace around her throat, a gesture that felt both natural and significant, a knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Mrs. Whitley with morning coffee. Instead, Jackson himself entered, already dressed for the day in work clothes, but with his hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," he greeted her, his deep voice warm but tinged with an uncertainty she hadn't heard before. "I hope you slept well." "Yes, thank you," Emma replied, surprised by his presence, but pleased nonetheless. "The room is very comfortable." Jackson nodded, seeming relieved. "Good, that's good." He hesitated, then continued. "I thought perhaps we might have breakfast together before I ride out with Frank. There are some matters I'd like to discuss." The formality of his manner brought a smile to Emma's lips. "That sounds lovely, Jackson, though you needn't be so formal. We are married now, after all." A flush of color appeared high on Jackson's cheekbones, an endearing sign that the always controlled rancher was not entirely immune to discomposure. "Yes, of course, I'm still adjusting to our new circumstances." "As am I," Emma assured him, moving to join him at the door. "Shall we go down together?" In the kitchen, they found Mrs. Whitley already preparing breakfast, humming softly as she worked. She turned as they entered, her expression brightening at the sight of them together. "Good morning to the newlyweds," she greeted cheerfully. "Coffee's hot and biscuits are just coming out of the oven." "It smells wonderful," Emma praised, taking a seat at the kitchen table rather than proceeding to the formal dining room. The choice seemed right for their first morning as husband and wife, more intimate, more in keeping with the partnership they were building. Jackson joined her without comment, though Emma noticed his approval in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. Mrs. Whitley served them breakfast with barely concealed satisfaction, clearly pleased to see them starting the day together. "What matters did you wish to discuss?" Emma asked once they were relatively alone, Mrs. Whitley having moved to the pantry to take inventory. Jackson set down his coffee cup, his expression growing more serious. "Two things. First, I received word late last night that the railroad representatives have confirmed their visit for next Wednesday. We'll have just over a week to prepare." Emma processed this news. "Sooner than we expected. What will they want to see?" "Everything," Jackson replied. "The operation, the books, the facilities. But more importantly, they'll want to assess our stability and reliability, whether we can be trusted with a long-term contract. Hence the importance of presenting a unified household," Emma concluded. "A stable family operation." "Exactly." Jackson studied her across the table. "I believe your presence will make a significant difference. Reynolds may have wealth and political connections, but his ranch is run by managers. He's rarely there himself. Evergreen has always been personal, a family legacy in the making. And now that family includes a wife," Emma added, understanding his meaning. "I'll need to know everything about the ranch operations before they arrive, not just the accounts I've been reviewing, but the practical aspects as well." Jackson's expression warmed with approval. "I had hoped you would say that. Frank and I can begin showing you more today, weather permitting." "Weather shouldn't be an obstacle," Emma said firmly. "If you and your men work in all conditions, I can certainly learn in them." A smile touched Jackson's lips. "You continue to surprise me, Emma Cooper." The use of her married name sent an unexpected thrill through Emma. "You mentioned two matters," she reminded him. Jackson's expression grew more guarded. Yes, the second is potentially more problematic. Victor Reynolds has requested to call on us this afternoon. Emma's eyebrows rose in surprise. Why would he do that? Ostensibly to offer congratulations on our marriage. The announcement appeared in yesterday's newspaper as planned. Jackson's jaw tightened, but Reynolds never does anything without ulterior motives. I suspect he wants to assess our relationship firsthand, to determine if it's genuine, Emma concluded, to see if he can use it against you somehow. Precisely. Jackson leaned forward, his blue eyes intent. We'll need to be convincing, Emma. Reynolds is observant and cunning. He'll be watching for any sign that our marriage is merely a business arrangement. Emma met his gaze steadily. Then we'll give him none. We'll present exactly what he least wants to see. A united front, a genuine partnership. Jackson studied her face, appreciation evident in his expression. You're remarkably composed about this. Most women would be uncomfortable with such performance. I'm not most women, Emma reminded him with a small smile. Besides, it's hardly a performance to demonstrate mutual respect and common purpose. Those elements of our marriage are entirely genuine. Something shifted in Jackson's eyes, a warmth, a recognition. Yes, they are. Their breakfast continued with discussion of the day ahead, ranch matters that needed attention, preparations for the railroad representatives, strategies for handling Reynolds' visit. Emma found herself genuinely engaged, offering suggestions that Jackson considered with evident respect. By the time they finished eating, Emma felt a growing confidence in their partnership. Whatever unusual circumstances had brought them together, they were developing a working relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals. I should join Frank, Jackson said finally, checking his pocket watch. He's waiting to ride to the north pasture. I'll come with you, Emma decided. If I'm to understand Evergreen Ranch, I should see all of it, not just the accounts on paper. Jackson appeared momentarily surprised, then pleased. It's bitter cold out there today. I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, Emma reminded him. Winter work is nothing new to me. 20 minutes later, properly bundled in a warm coat, gloves, and a borrowed hat from Mrs. Whitley, Emma found herself on horseback beside Jackson and Frank, riding toward the northern boundary of Evergreen Ranch. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but the exhilaration of being outdoors, of seeing the snow-covered landscape stretching before them, more than compensated for the discomfort. The disputed fence line is just ahead, Frank explained as they crested a rise. Reynolds claims it encroaches on his property by 50 feet along this stretch. Emma studied the landscape with a practical eye. What's so valuable about this particular section? It's not about the land itself, Jackson replied, guiding his horse alongside hers. It's about access to Silver Creek, which runs just beyond those trees. The creek provides the most reliable water source for this entire section of grazing land. And if you lose access to it, we'd be forced to rely on wells and snowmelt, which aren't sufficient during the driest months. Jackson pointed toward the western horizon. Reynolds' property has natural springs that never run dry. He's trying to secure an advantage that would make this section of my land less viable for grazing. Emma nodded, understanding the strategy. Devalue it so you might be forced to sell. Exactly. Jackson looked impressed by her quick grasp of the situation. The town council meets on Tuesday to hear his complaint. Judge Patterson has agreed to delay any decision until a proper survey can be conducted, but Reynolds is pushing hard for immediate action. They reached the fence line in question, a well-constructed barrier of posts and wire that stretched across the rolling terrain. On the far side, the land looked identical. Same soil, same scattered pine trees, same blanket of pristine snow. We dug the post holes ourselves, Frank said, dismounting to examine one of the fence posts. 15 years ago. I remember because it was the summer of that terrible heat wave. Ground was hard as iron. And you're certain of the boundary markers? Emma asked, practical as always. Absolutely, Jackson confirmed. The original survey stakes are still in place. I made sure of it. He dismounted and helped Emma down from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the biting cold. Together, they walked the fence line, Jackson pointing out various landmarks and explaining the significance of different grazing areas. Emma listened intently, asking questions that revealed her quick mind and practical understanding of agricultural concerns. You have a natural eye for this, Jackson observed as they returned to their horses. Most people see only snow and trees. You see opportunities and challenges. Farm life teaches you to look beyond the surface, Emma replied, pleased by his assessment. My father always said that success or failure often hinged on noticing what others overlooked. A wise man, Jackson commented, helping her back onto her horse with the same careful strength he had shown earlier. As they rode toward the main herd, Emma found herself studying her new husband with growing interest. In this environment, outdoors, engaged with the land he loved, Jackson seemed more accessible, more connected to his true self. The stern businessman she had first met was still present, but layered now with glimpses of passion, vision, and even occasional humor. They spent the morning visiting different sections of the ranch, Jackson and Frank explaining operations, while Emma absorbed every detail. She met several of the ranch hands, all of whom treated her with a respectful deference that suggested they had already accepted her as the mistress of Evergreen. By the time they returned to the main house for lunch, Emma felt she had gained a clearer understanding not just of the ranch's operations, but of the man she had married. Jackson Cooper had built something remarkable here, not merely a successful business, but a community of sorts, a place where people work together toward a common vision. You look pleased, Jackson observed as they removed their outer garments in the house's warm entryway. I am, Emma confirmed. Evergreen is even more impressive when seen in full operation. You've built something remarkable here, Jackson. A flash of genuine pleasure crossed his features at her praise. Thank you. That means more than you might realize. Their eyes held for a moment, something unspoken passing between them. Mutual respect deepening into something warmer, more personal. The moment was broken by Mrs. Whitley's appearance. There you are. Lunch is ready, and then we need to prepare for Mr. Reynolds' visit at 3. Jenny's pressing the good tablecloth now. Emma glanced at Jackson, noting the tension that immediately returned to his posture at the mention of Reynolds. We'll be right there, Mrs. Whitley, and perhaps after lunch you could help me select an appropriate dress for receiving our guest? The housekeeper nodded approvingly. The green would be lovely. Shows off your coloring. After a hearty lunch of soup and fresh bread, Emma retreated upstairs to prepare for Reynolds' visit. With Mrs. Whitley's assistance, she changed into her green dress, her second best after the blue she had worn for the wedding, and arranged her hair more formally than usual. Jackson's mother's necklace completed the ensemble, the pale blue topaz creating a striking contrast against the deep green of the dress. There, Mrs. Whitley said with satisfaction, every inch the mistress of Evergreen Ranch. Emma studied her reflection, searching for any hint of the desperate mail-order bride who had arrived less than a week ago. The woman who looked back at her appeared confident, composed, and purposeful, qualities she had always possessed, but which now seemed externalized in her bearing and expression. Mr. Cooper is waiting in the parlor, Mrs. Whitley informed her. He's changed into his good suit, too. Emma descended the stairs with deliberate grace, conscious of the role she needed to play for Reynolds' benefit. This would be their first test as a married couple, convincing a skeptical and observant adversary that their union was genuine. Jackson stood at the parlor window, looking out over the ranch yard. He turned as she entered, and the appreciation in his eyes sent a flutter through Emma's chest. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Emma moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Are you ready for this?" "With you beside me?" "Yes." The confidence in his voice bolstered her own. At precisely 3 o'clock, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Victor Reynolds' arrival. Jackson tensed almost imperceptibly, then consciously relaxed his posture. Emma placed her hand gently on his arm, a gesture of support that felt both strategic and genuinely comforting. They watched through the window as Reynolds dismounted, a well-dressed man of medium height with carefully styled dark hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. They watched through the window as Reynolds dismounted, a well-dressed man of medium height with carefully styled dark hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. Unlike Jackson's practical attire, Reynolds wore clothes that seemed designed to impress, a tailored suit that must have come from Denver or perhaps even Chicago, with gold cufflinks glinting at his wrists and a diamond stickpin in his cravat. "Let him come to us," Jackson murmured, leading Emma to the sofa where they sat together, his arm resting casually along the back behind her shoulders. Mrs. Whitley showed Reynolds into the parlor moments later, announcing him with formal correctness, before retreating to prepare coffee. "Cooper," Reynolds greeted with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And the new Mrs. Cooper. How delightful to make your acquaintance at last." Emma offered her hand with polite reserve. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for your congratulatory visit." Reynolds took her hand, holding it perhaps a moment longer than strictly proper. "The pleasure is entirely mine. I must say, Cooper has been keeping you quite the secret. The announcement in yesterday's paper came as quite a surprise to many. In Pine Ridge, we preferred a private ceremony," Jackson replied smoothly. "Emma and I are both practical people who see little need for elaborate social displays." Reynolds settled into an armchair opposite them, his assessing gaze taking in every detail of their posture, their proximity, the parlor's wedding decorations still adorning the mantelpiece. Indeed, though some might consider marriage itself a social display of sorts. His smile remained fixed as his eyes moved to Emma. "Tell me, Mrs. Cooper, how are you finding ranch life? I understand you're recently arrived from back east." "The Midwest, actually," Emma corrected gently. "And I find Evergreen Ranch quite magnificent. Jackson has built something truly remarkable here." The use of Jackson's given name was deliberate, as was the admiration in her tone, both genuine, though emphasized for Reynolds' benefit. "You seem quite comfortable already," Reynolds observed, "almost as if you've been here much longer than a week." Emma met his gaze steadily. "When something is right, Mr. Reynolds, it feels familiar. Almost immediately, don't you find? A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Reynolds' features before his smile returned. Poetic sentiment. Though I confess I'm more inclined toward practical considerations myself." "As are we," Jackson interjected, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful. "Emma and I share a practical approach to most matters." Mrs. Whitley arrived with coffee, providing a momentary reprieve from the subtle tension. As she served, Reynolds continued his careful observation, noting, Emma was certain, how Jackson took his coffee without asking, how Emma reached naturally for the sugar bowl to place it nearer her husband's cup, the small domestic gestures that suggested established familiarity. "I must say, Mrs. Cooper, you're not at all what I expected when I heard Cooper had finally taken a wife," Reynolds commented, accepting his coffee with a nod to Mrs. Whitley. "Oh? And what did you expect, Mr. Reynolds?" Emma asked, maintaining her composure despite the implied slight. Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. "The usual, I suppose. Some delicate eastern flower who would wilt at the first sight of ranch work. You seem made of sturdier stuff." "Thank you," Emma replied, choosing to take his assessment as a compliment. I was raised to value capability over ornamental qualities. A fortunate perspective for a rancher's wife, Reynolds noted, his gaze shifting to Jackson. Speaking of ranching matters, Cooper, have you reconsidered my offer for that northern section? With a new wife to consider, you might find the immediate capital more valuable than disputed grazing land. The abrupt shift to business didn't surprise Emma. Though she noted the calculated timing, Reynolds clearly believed a new wife might pressure Jackson toward financial security over long-term strategy. Actually, Emma interjected before Jackson could respond, we were discussing that very section this morning. The water access it provides is crucial to our expansion plans. Reynolds' eyebrows rose at her use of "our" and her evident knowledge of ranch operations. I see Jackson has wasted no time including you in business matters. We're partners in all aspects of Evergreen Ranch, Jackson stated, his hand moving to rest lightly on Emma's shoulder in a gesture that appeared both protective and affectionate. Emma brings considerable agricultural experience and a fresh perspective that's already proving valuable. Reynolds studied them both, his expression calculatingly pleasant. How progressive of you, Cooper. Most men prefer to keep business and domestic matters separate. Most men fail to recognize the intelligence and capability of the women they marry, Emma countered with a serene smile. Fortunately, Jackson is not most men. A flash of genuine warmth passed between them at her words. A moment of connection that wasn't merely for Reynolds' benefit. Reynolds observed this exchange with narrowed eyes, clearly reassessing the dynamic he had expected to find. Well, he said finally, setting aside his half-finished coffee, I can see you two are well-matched indeed. Almost as if you've known each other for years, rather than the brief correspondence Clara arranged. The mention of Jackson's sister, knowledge Reynolds shouldn't rightfully have, was clearly designed to unsettle them. Emma felt Jackson tense beside her, but maintained her own composure. Sometimes the most meaningful connections require little time to establish, she replied smoothly. When values and visions align, the rest follows naturally. Reynolds smiled thinly. How fortunate for you both. He stood, signaling the end of his visit. I won't take more of your time today. Newlyweds should have their privacy after all. Jackson rose as well, his posture alert but controlled. Thank you for your congratulations, Reynolds. I trust we'll see you at the town council meeting on Tuesday. Wouldn't miss it, Reynolds confirmed with a smile that held no warmth. I look forward to resolving our boundary dispute once and for all. As do I, Jackson replied evenly. Reynolds turned to Emma with an elaborate bow. Mrs. Cooper, a pleasure to make your acquaintance. I do hope you'll both attend the Founders' Day celebration next month. As newcomers to our community, it would be an excellent opportunity to establish yourselves socially. We'll consider it, Emma responded non-committally, recognizing the invitation as another calculated move rather than genuine hospitality. After Reynolds departed, Jackson moved to the window, watching until the man was well away from the house before turning back to Emma with visible admiration. You were remarkable, he said simply. I couldn't have asked for a more convincing performance. Emma smiled, pleased by his praise but strangely unsettled by his characterization. It wasn't entirely a performance, Jackson. He studied her face with sudden intensity. No? No, she confirmed softly. The respect I expressed for what you've built here is genuine, and we are partners now, in purpose, if not yet in other ways. Something shifted in Jackson's expression. A softening, a recognition. Yes, he agreed, his deep voice rougher than usual. We are. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Jackson cleared his throat, returning to more familiar territory. Reynolds was fishing for information, he observed. trying to gauge whether our marriage is genuine or merely a business arrangement to satisfy my investors." "And what conclusion do you think he reached?" Emma asked. Jackson considered this. "He's suspicious, but not certain. The mention of Clara was deliberate, testing to see if we would contradict the story we've established about our introduction. He seems to have sources of information within your circle," Emma noted with concern. "He knew about Clara's supposed involvement in our meeting before we announced it. Reynolds has always had an uncanny knack for acquiring information," Jackson agreed grimly. "It's one of the things that makes him dangerous." Emma moved to join Jackson at the window, standing close enough that their arms nearly touched. "What do you think his next move will be?" "He'll pursue the boundary dispute at the town council meeting, hoping to undermine my position before the railroad representatives arrive." Jackson's expression was thoughtful rather than worried. "But I suspect he's already revising his strategy. Your presence changes his calculations." "How so?" "Reynolds expected to find a token wife, someone I married purely for appearances. A ducky with no real involvement in ranch operations." Jackson turned to face her directly. "Instead, he found a true partner who understands the business and supports its goals. That's a much more formidable obstacle to his plans." Emma felt a warm glow at Jackson's assessment. "Then we've succeeded in our first test. Thanks largely to you," Jackson acknowledged. He hesitated, then added with uncharacteristic uncertainty, "Emma, I want you to know that I appreciate not just your willingness to maintain our agreed-upon appearance, but the genuine interest you've shown in Evergreen Ranch. It means a great deal to me." The admission, offered with evident difficulty by a man unaccustomed to expressing personal feelings, touched Emma deeply. "This is my home now," she said simply. "Your success is my success. Your concerns are my concerns." Jackson studied her face, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual reserve. "When I placed that advertisement, I expected a practical arrangement with a suitable companion. I never expected to find someone who would understand what Evergreen means to me, who would see its value beyond mere financial prospects." "Perhaps you found exactly what you needed, even if it wasn't what you thought you wanted," Emma suggested quietly. A ghost of a smile touched Jackson's lips. "Perhaps I did." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of ranch activities. Jackson returned to work with Frank, while Emma continued her study of the account books, making notes for potential improvements in their record-keeping system. By evening, she had developed a more efficient method for tracking individual herd expenses that visibly impressed Jackson when she showed him after dinner. Their first night as husband and wife followed the same pattern as their wedding night, Jackson retiring to the dressing room after a formal goodnight, leaving Emma alone in the master bedroom. Yet something had shifted between them, a subtle warming of their interactions, a growing ease in each other's presence that suggested their practical arrangement was evolving into something neither had anticipated. Sunday brought a new test of their partnership when Mrs. Whitley gently suggested they might want to attend church services in Pine Ridge. "It would be expected," the housekeeper explained over breakfast. "First Sunday as a married couple and all, people will be looking to congratulate you properly." Jackson glanced at Emma, deferring to her preference without words, a small gesture that suggested growing consideration. "I think it's a good idea," Emma decided. "It's important to establish ourselves as part of the community, especially before the town council meeting on Tuesday." Jackson nodded, approval evident in his expression. "I'll have the good sleigh prepared. The roads are still too snow-covered for the carriage." An hour later, they were gliding toward Pine Ridge in a handsome sleigh drawn by Jackson's matched gray horses. Emma, dressed in her blue wedding dress with Jackson's mother's necklace at her throat, found herself enjoying the novelty of the experience, despite her nerves about facing the town's scrutiny. "You look beautiful," Jackson commented as they approached the outskirts of Pine Ridge, his deep voice cutting through the crisp winter air. "Though I suspect you'll be the subject of considerable curiosity today." "We both will," Emma corrected with a small smile. "The confirmed bachelor who suddenly acquired a wife will draw as much interest as the unknown bride." Jackson chuckled, the sound warm and surprisingly youthful. "True enough. Are you prepared for the questions, the scrutiny?" "I grew up in a small farming community," Emma reminded him. "I'm familiar with how quickly information and misinformation can spread. We'll simply present ourselves as we are, a newly married couple establishing our life together." "A simple truth," Jackson agreed, though his eyes held a question when they met hers. "Truth enough," Emma replied softly, understanding his unspoken query. What they had might have begun as a business arrangement, but it was becoming something more genuine with each passing day, a partnership based on mutual respect and growing affection, if not yet the traditional foundations of marriage. The Pine Ridge First Presbyterian Church was a modest white structure, with a tall steeple that dominated the town's main street. As Jackson helped Emma down from the sleigh, she could feel the weight of curious eyes from every direction. Church attendees milled about on the steps and walkway, conversations pausing as the new Mrs. Cooper made her first public appearance. Jackson offered his arm with formal correctness, his expression composed but alert. Emma placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin slightly, the posture of a woman secure in her position, not a mail-order bride desperate for acceptance. "Mrs. Cooper, how delightful to meet you at last." The minister's wife, a plump, cheerful woman in her 50s, was the first to approach. "I'm Martha Patterson. The judge is my husband. We were so pleased to hear of your marriage." "Thank you." "Mrs. Patterson," Emma replied warmly, "it's lovely to meet you." Other introductions followed in quick succession: the mayor's wife, the general store owner and his family, various ranchers and townspeople whose names Emma struggled to commit to memory. Jackson remained at her side throughout, his steady presence a comfort amid the swirl of new faces and thinly veiled curiosity. "She's nothing like I expected," Emma overheard one woman whisper to another. "Quite refined for a farmer's daughter." "Cooper's a dark horse," another replied. "Who knew he even had a courtship underway, and through his sister's connections in Denver, they say." Emma maintained her composure through it all, answering questions with polite vagueness that revealed little of their actual circumstances, while reinforcing the narrative they had established. Jackson, typically reserved in social settings, demonstrated surprising attentiveness, anticipating her needs and subtly guiding conversations away from overly personal inquiries. They had just reached the church steps when a familiar voice called, "Out Cooper, Mrs. Cooper, a moment of your time." Emma turned to see Victor Reynolds approaching, accompanied by a strikingly beautiful blonde woman in an elaborate fur-trimmed coat that spoke of Eastern fashions and considerable expense. "Reynolds," Jackson acknowledged with cool politeness. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "Olivia insists on regular church attendance," Reynolds replied with a gesture toward his companion. "Says it's good for business to be seen as God-fearing. Mrs. Cooper, may I present Miss Olivia Sinclair? Recently arrived from Boston and a dear friend." The emphasis he placed on friend suggested a relationship that likely extended beyond mere acquaintance. The beautiful blonde offered Emma a practiced smile that revealed perfect teeth, but reached nowhere near her calculating eyes. "Mrs. Cooper," she greeted in a musical voice laced with the refined accent of Eastern boarding schools. "How charming to meet you. Victor has told me all about your unusual circumstances." The deliberate pause was clearly meant to unsettle, But Emma had faced worse challenges than a society beauty's thinly veiled condescension. "Miss Sinclair," she replied with perfect composure, "how kind of Mr. Reynolds to take such interest in our happiness. Though I confess, I'm curious what unusual circumstances he might have mentioned, given that our courtship was quite traditional by most standards." Olivia's smile faltered slightly at Emma's direct response. Reynolds interjected smoothly, "Merely that your courtship was conducted largely through correspondence, my dear Mrs. Cooper, quite romantic in its way." "Yes," Emma agreed, moving slightly closer to Jackson in a gesture that appeared natural but deliberate. When one finds a kindred, spirit distance becomes merely a temporary inconvenience. Jackson's hand came to rest at the small of her back, supportive, possessive, and entirely convincing. "We should take our seats," he suggested. "The service will be starting soon." Reynolds' eyes narrowed slightly at their easy intimacy. "Of course. Perhaps you'll join us for dinner at the hotel afterward. Olivia would love to become better acquainted with Pine Ridge's newest resident." The invitation was clearly strategic rather than hospitable, another opportunity to observe and assess their relationship. Emma glanced at Jackson, a silent communication passing between them before he responded. "Another time, perhaps," Jackson declined smoothly. "We have matters at the ranch requiring our attention this afternoon." "How dedicated," Olivia commented, with a perfectly arched brow. "Most newlyweds prefer to spend their Sundays in more leisurely pursuits." The implication brought a flush to Emma's cheeks, despite her determination to remain unruffled. Jackson's response was immediate and unexpectedly effective. "Emma's dedication to Evergreen Ranch is one of the many qualities I admire in my wife," he stated, his deep voice carrying just far enough to be overheard by several nearby churchgoers. "Her understanding of what matters to me, what we're building together, is something I treasure." The genuine appreciation in his tone silenced Olivia more effectively than any sharp retort could have. Reynolds assessed them both with renewed calculation before offering an elaborate bow. "Another time, then. Enjoy the service." As they climbed the church steps, Emma felt Jackson's hand still steady at her back, its warmth penetrating through her coat and dress. "Thank you," she murmured. "That was well handled." "I merely stated the truth," Jackson replied quietly, surprising them both. The church service itself provided a welcome respite from the social maneuvering, allowing Emma time to collect her thoughts and observe the community from a position of relative anonymity. Jackson sat beside her in the Cooper family pew, third from the front, she noted, a position that spoke of established status within the community. Throughout the service, she was acutely aware of his presence, the subtle scent of his shaving soap, the solid breadth of his shoulder occasionally brushing against hers, the way his deep voice joined in the hymns with surprising confidence. Small details that she was coming to associate with the complex man who was now her husband. When they finally departed after enduring another gauntlet of curious well-wishers, Emma felt a curious mixture of relief and satisfaction. Their first public appearance as husband and wife had been a success by any measure. They had presented a united front, reinforced their carefully constructed narrative, and perhaps most importantly, given Reynolds no ammunition to use against them. "You were magnificent," Jackson commented as they cleared the town limits, the sleigh gliding smoothly over packed snow. "I've never seen Reynolds so thoroughly countered." Emma smiled, pleased by his praise. Miss Sinclair was an unexpected complication. "Reynolds always surrounds himself with beautiful possessions," Jackson observed grimly, "and he considers women very much in that category." "She seemed intelligent beneath the practiced charm," Emma noted, "and quite attuned to his moods. I suspect she's more than merely decorative in his schemes. Jackson glanced at her with evident admiration. "You miss nothing, do you?" "I try not to," Emma replied simply, "especially when it affects our future." Our future. The phrase hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore fully. They rode in companionable silence for several minutes, the only sounds the jingle of harness, bells and the soft shush of runners on snow. "The town council meets Tuesday," Jackson said finally, his thoughts clearly returning to practical matters. "Reynolds will present his boundary complaint, supported by his surveyor from Cheyenne." "And our strategy?" Emma prompted. "Judge Patterson has agreed to delay any final decision until a neutral survey can be conducted," Jackson explained. "But Reynolds will push hard for immediate action. He wants this resolved before the railroad representatives arrive on Wednesday." Emma considered this. "Perhaps we should invite Judge Patterson to dinner tomorrow evening, a social call to thank him for performing our ceremony." Jackson looked at her with renewed respect. Shrewd thinking. A reminder of his connection to us without any improper discussion of the pending case. "Exactly," Emma confirmed. "And an opportunity to demonstrate the stability and respectability of our household before he faces Reynolds's arguments on Tuesday." "Emma Cooper," Jackson said with genuine warmth, "you are proving to be the most valuable addition Evergreen Ranch has ever received." The compliment, offered with uncharacteristic openness, brought color to Emma's cheeks despite the winter chill. "I'm merely protecting our interests," she demurred. "Our interests," Jackson repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I'm beginning to understand what that truly means." As they approached Evergreen Ranch, Emma found herself studying the property with new eyes, not merely as a refuge from desperate circumstances or a business opportunity, but as home, her future. Whatever had begun as practical necessity was evolving into something neither of them had anticipated, a genuine partnership that held the promise of deeper connection. Whether that promise would be fulfilled remained to be seen. But as Jackson helped her down from the sleigh, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary, Emma felt a flutter of hope that their wedding night discovery might be merely the beginning of what they could find in each other. Judge Patterson accepted their dinner invitation with evident pleasure, arriving at Evergreen Ranch on Monday evening, accompanied by his wife Martha. The judge, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and thoughtful eyes, greeted Emma with genuine warmth, clearly pleased to see the couple whose union he had formalized settling into married life. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, taking her hand in both of his, "you've brought a welcome presence to Evergreen Ranch. I don't believe I've seen this place looking so well appointed in all the years I've known it." "Thank you, Judge Patterson," Emma replied, pleased by the compliment. "I'm still finding my way, but Evergreen already feels like home." "As it should," Martha Patterson interjected with motherly approval. "A wife's touch transforms a house into a home, even one as fine as this." Jackson, standing beside Emma with an attentiveness that was becoming natural rather than calculated, offered a slight smile. "Emma has transformed more than just the house," he acknowledged. "Her insights into ranch operations have already proven invaluable." The genuine appreciation in his voice brought a warmth to Emma's cheeks. Though they had planned to present a united front for their guests' benefit, Jackson's praise felt sincere rather than performative, another small indication of how their relationship was evolving beyond its practical beginnings. Mrs. Whitley had outdone herself with dinner, preparing a roast beef with all the trimmings that drew appreciative murmurs from their guests. Emma took her place at the opposite end of the table from Jackson, the traditional position for the mistress of the house, and found herself settling into the role with surprising ease, directing conversation and ensuring their guests' comfort, as if she had been doing so for years rather than days. Throughout the evening, conversation flowed naturally, touching on town matters, regional politics, and the upcoming railroad expansion. Judge Patterson, when not enjoying Mrs. Whitley's excellent cooking, proved to be a gifted raconteur with stories of Pine Ridge's early days that had them all laughing. Not once did the topic of Victor Reynolds or the pending boundary dispute arise directly, exactly as Emma had planned. Instead, their evening presented precisely the image they wished to cultivate, a stable, harmonious household headed by a capable couple with deep connections to the community and clear vision for the future. The message was delivered without a single explicit word on the subject. As they bid the Pattersons goodnight, the judge clasped Jackson's hand firmly. "Fine evening, Cooper. You and Mrs. Cooper make an impressive team." "Thank you, Judge," Jackson replied, his hand moving naturally to the small of Emma's back, a gesture that had become habitual over the past days. "We appreciate you both making time for us." "Nonsense," Martha Patterson declared, embracing Emma warmly. "It's we who should thank you. Best meal we've had in months, and such pleasant company, too." After their guests departed, Jackson and Emma stood together on the porch, watching the Pattersons' sleigh disappear down the snow-covered drive. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars sharp as diamond chips against the black velvet sky. "That went well," Emma observed, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "Brilliantly," Jackson agreed. "You were right about inviting them. Patterson's always been fair-minded. But a personal connection never hurts when facing Reynolds' scheming." Emma smiled, pleased by his acknowledgement. "It wasn't merely strategic. I genuinely enjoyed their company." "As did I," Jackson admitted. He hesitated, then added, "You're a natural hostess, Emma. The way you managed the conversation made them feel welcome. It was remarkable to witness." The compliment, offered with uncharacteristic openness, touched her deeply. "My mother believed in the importance of creating fellowship even during the hardest times, perhaps especially then." Jackson studied her face in the moonlight, his expression thoughtful. "She taught you well." He paused, seeming to debate his next words. "I've been meaning to ask, would you like to write to your friends back home? Let them know of your new circumstances." The question caught Emma by surprise. In the whirlwind of recent events, she had given little thought to her former life or the few acquaintances she had left behind. "That's thoughtful of you, but there's no one in particular who would be concerned about my whereabouts. After my parents died, I had only distant connections at best." Something like understanding crossed Jackson's features. "Then we are more alike than I realized." The shared recognition of their similar isolation created a moment of connection between them. Two solitary souls who had found each other through circumstance and necessity. "We should go inside," Jackson said finally, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Tomorrow will be challenging." The town council meeting loomed large in both their minds. Though Judge Patterson's evident goodwill was encouraging, Reynolds would undoubtedly come prepared with every advantage money and influence could secure. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Emma said as they turned toward the warm light of the house, "we'll face it together." Jackson's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers strong and warm against her own. "Together," he agreed, the word a promise in the quiet night. Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, the temperature well below freezing as Emma and Jackson prepared for their journey to Pine Ridge. Emma dressed with particular care in her best blue dress, arranging her hair in a style that conveyed both dignity and practicality. Jackson's mother's necklace completed her ensemble, the pale blue topaz catching the morning light as she fastened it around her throat. "You look perfect," Jackson commented when she joined him for breakfast, his approval evident in his gaze. "Professional but approachable." Emma smiled at his practical assessment. "Exactly what I was aiming for, and you look quite distinguished yourself." Jackson wore his best suit with a silver brocade waistcoat, the same outfit he had worn for their wedding. The formality of his attire signaled the importance he placed on the day's proceedings. "Frank will accompany us," Jackson informed her as they ate. "He can testify to the original placement of the fence if necessary, and the ledgers showing our maintenance of that section over the years," Emma confirmed. "I've organized them chronologically, with the relevant entries marked." Jackson's expression warmed with appreciation. "Already in my satchel, your system for categorizing them is remarkably clear." Their preparations complete, they set out for Pine Ridge in the sleigh, Frank following on horseback. The town appeared unusually busy when they arrived, with several wagons and horses gathered around the town hall, a simple two-story structure that housed both government offices and meeting rooms. "Word has spread about the dispute," Frank observed as he helped Emma down from the sleigh. "Reynolds has made sure of that." Inside the town hall, the main meeting room was already nearly full, with townspeople occupying most of the available chairs. At the front, a long table had been arranged for the 5 council members, with Judge Patterson's chair slightly elevated in the center, signifying his position as head of the council. Emma noted Victor Reynolds already present, seated, in the front row beside a thin, academic-looking man she assumed was the surveyor from Cheyenne. Reynolds had dressed for the occasion in an expensive suit that seemed calculated to emphasize the difference between his Eastern wealth and the more practical attire of most Pine Ridge residents. Reynolds glanced up as they entered, a calculating smile forming as he noted their arrival. He leaned to whisper something to his companion, both men turning to observe Emma and Jackson with undisguised interest. "Ignore them," Jackson murmured, guiding Emma to seats on the opposite side of the room. "Reynolds feeds on reaction." The meeting began promptly at 10 o'clock, with Judge Patterson calling the council to order. After dispensing with routine matters, he addressed the boundary dispute directly. "The council will now hear the complaint brought by Mr. Victor Reynolds regarding the northern boundary line between his property and Evergreen Ranch," Patterson announced, his voice carrying easily through the crowded room. "Mr. Reynolds, you may present your case." Reynolds rose with practiced grace, moving to stand before the council with the confident air of a man accustomed to deference. "Thank you, Judge Patterson, esteemed council members," he began, his voice modulated to project sincerity. "This matter is straightforward but significant. For years, I have maintained cordial relations with my neighbor, Mr. Cooper, despite discovering that the fence line along our northern boundary encroaches upon my property by approximately 50 feet along a stretch of nearly half a mile." Murmurs spread through the audience as Reynolds continued smoothly. "Being a man who prefers cooperation to conflict, I attempted to resolve this matter privately, offering to purchase the disputed section at a price well above market value. Unfortunately, these efforts were rebuffed." Emma watched as Reynolds paced slightly, his movements calculated to draw attention. "Recently, I engaged the services of Mr. Harold Webster, a certified surveyor from Cheyenne, to examine the boundary markers and provide a professional assessment." "Mr. Webster?" The thin man rose, clutching a roll of papers. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds." He approached the council table, unrolling a detailed map of the area. "Based on the original territorial surveys and property deeds, it is my professional opinion that the fence line in question encroaches onto Mr. Reynolds' property by an average of 52 feet over a distance of approximately 2,400 feet. Judge Patterson examined the map carefully. "And your credentials, Mr. Webster?" 15 years as a certified territorial surveyor, sir. I've worked throughout Wyoming and Colorado, primarily on railroad and mining claims." Webster handed over several official-looking documents, my certifications and references. As the judge reviewed these materials, Reynolds resumed his presentation. "Given Mr. Webster's expert testimony, I request that the council order the immediate removal and proper repositioning of the fence line, along with fair compensation for the use of my property over the past 12 years." The encroachment has prevented me from utilizing valuable water access that rightfully belongs to my ranch." Judge Patterson nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Cooper, do you wish to respond to these claims?" Jackson rose with a calm dignity, his expression composed as he addressed the council. "Thank you, Judge Patterson. I categorically dispute Mr. Reynolds' claim. The fence line in question was established 15 years ago based on the original survey stakes placed by territorial surveyors when I purchased the property." He approached the council table, removing several yellow documents from his satchel. "These are my original deed and survey documents, showing the property boundaries as recorded in the Territorial Land Office. Additionally, I have brought records documenting our continuous maintenance of the disputed section over the past 15 years without any prior objection from Mr. Reynolds or previous neighboring property owners." Emma watched with quiet pride as Jackson presented his case methodically, his deep voice steady and authoritative. The respect with which the council members listened spoke to his standing in the community, a reputation built through years of fair dealings and hard work. "Furthermore," Jackson continued, "I find the timing of this complaint highly suspicious. For 12 years, Mr. Reynolds has expressed no concerns about this boundary. Only now, as we both compete for the upcoming railroad contract, has he suddenly discovered this alleged encroachment." Murmurs swept through the audience at this direct reference to the underlying competition between the two ranches. Reynolds remained impassive, though Emma noted a tightening around his eyes that suggested Jackson's observation had struck home. Judge Patterson considered the documents Jackson had presented. "Mr. Cooper, do you have any expert testimony to counter Mr. Webster's survey findings?" "I do not have a recent survey," Jackson acknowledged, "precisely because there has never been any question about these boundaries until now. However, I do have Frank Miller, my foreman, who personally helped establish the fence line according to the original survey stakes, which remain in place to this day." Frank stepped forward at Jackson's gesture, his weathered face serious as he addressed the council. "Judge Patterson, council members, I helped drive those posts myself, following the original survey stakes exactly. We were careful about it. Mr. Cooper insisted on precision. Those stakes are still there, and the fence line hasn't moved an inch in 15 years. Reynolds rose smoothly. "With all due respect to Mr. Miller's recollection, a foreman's memory from 15 years ago hardly constitutes expert testimony. Mr. Webster is a certified professional whose findings are based on scientific measurement, not sentiment or loyalty." "Are you questioning Mr. Miller's honesty, Reynolds?" Jackson asked sharply. "Not at all," Reynolds replied with calculated reasonableness. "Merely noting that memory is fallible, while professional surveys are documented and verifiable." Judge Patterson raised a hand to prevent further exchange. "Gentlemen, please, this council will consider both positions." He consulted briefly with the other council members before continuing. "Given the technical nature of this dispute and the contradictory claims, I propose that the council commission an independent survey by a neutral third party before making any determination." Reynolds frowned slightly. "Judge Patterson, with all respect, delay serves only Mr. Cooper's interests. The encroachment continues while we await yet another survey. And a hasty judgment based on a single survey commissioned by an interested party serves only your interests, Mr. Reynolds." Emma interjected, rising to stand beside Jackson. A ripple of surprise moved through the audience at her intervention. Women rarely spoke at town council meetings, particularly newcomers with no established standing in the community. Judge Patterson appeared momentarily taken aback, but recovered quickly. "Mrs. Cooper, do you wish to address the council?" "If the council permits," Emma replied respectfully. Reynolds didn't bother to hide his displeasure. Judge Patterson, with all due respect to Mrs. Cooper's enthusiasm for her new husband's interests, this is a matter of property law and surveying expertise. Mrs. Cooper has reviewed all our property records and maintenance logs, Jackson stated firmly. She's as familiar with the details of this matter as I am. Emma felt a surge of gratitude for Jackson's support. Judge Patterson considered for a moment, then nodded. The council will hear Mrs. Cooper. Moving forward with composed confidence, Emma addressed the council directly. Honorable council members, I've spent the past several days reviewing Evergreen Ranch's records dating back to its establishment. What struck me most was the meticulous documentation of every fence post, every water access point, every property improvement. She removed several ledgers from Jackson's satchel, opening one, to a marked page. Here, dated 15 years ago, is the record of materials purchased for the northern boundary fence, along with precise measurements based on the original survey stakes. Following that are 15 years of maintenance records for that specific section, documented season by season. Emma turned slightly to include the audience in her address. More telling than these records, however, is the timing of Mr. Reynolds' complaint. For 12 years, this boundary was apparently unproblematic. Only now, as Evergreen Ranch prepares to expand operations in anticipation of the railroad contract, has this suddenly become an issue requiring immediate resolution. Reynolds rose, his expression carefully controlled. Judge Patterson, Mrs. Cooper is new to our community and understandably eager to defend her husband's interests. However, her insinuations about my motives are inappropriate and irrelevant to the survey findings. Emma met his gaze steadily. I've made no insinuations, Mr. Reynolds. I've merely noted the curious timing of your complaint and suggested that a neutral survey would serve the interests of justice rather than expediency. A murmur of approval rippled through sections of the audience. Reynolds' jaw tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. Judge Patterson tapped his gavel lightly. Thank you, Mrs. Cooper. Your points are well taken. He conferred briefly with the other council members before delivering their decision. This council will commission an independent surveyor from Laramie to examine the disputed boundary. Until that survey is complete, no action will be taken regarding the fence line or any compensation claims. He fixed both men with a stern gaze. This matter will be resolved based on facts and proper procedure, not urgency or influence. Though Reynolds maintained a pleasant exterior, Emma could see the frustration in his eyes. His strategy to force a quick decision in his favor had failed, largely due to Judge Patterson's commitment to proper process. A commitment Emma suspected had been reinforced by their dinner the previous evening. Council is adjourned until next Tuesday, Judge Patterson announced, bringing the meeting to a close. As people began to disperse, Reynolds approached them, his expression composed, but his eyes cold. Impressive performance, Mrs. Cooper. One might almost believe you've been involved with Evergreen Ranch for years rather than days. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds, Emma replied calmly. I believe in thoroughly understanding matters that affect my home. Home, Reynolds repeated with a thin smile. How quickly you've settled in. I admit I underestimated you both. The mail-order bride and the reluctant husband. Who would have thought you'd present such a united front? Emma felt Jackson tense beside her at Reynolds' deliberate reference to their arrangement. Our circumstances are no secret, Mr. Reynolds, she stated steadily. Jackson placed an advertisement, I responded, and we discovered mutual compatibility. Many successful marriages have begun similarly. Indeed, Reynolds agreed with false pleasantness, though few with quite such convenient timing relative to business considerations. Before Jackson could respond, Judge Patterson approached, effectively ending Reynolds' needling. Cooper. Mrs. Cooper, a moment if you would. Reynolds retreated with a slight bow, though his parting glance promised future confrontations. "That was well handled," the judge commented, once Reynolds was out of earshot. "Both of you presented your case effectively." "Thank you for ensuring proper procedure, Judge Patterson," Jackson replied. Reynolds was clearly hoping to force a quick decision while the railroad representatives are in town. Patterson nodded gravely. "He's been cultivating influence with certain council members. Fortunately, in matters of property disputes, my vote carries particular weight." He lowered his voice slightly. "The surveyor from Laramie is a former colleague of mine, scrupulously honest and immune to financial incentives. It will take at least 2 weeks for him to arrive and complete his work, by which time the railroad contract will be decided," Emma observed quietly. "Precisely," Patterson confirmed with a slight smile. "A fortunate coincidence of timing." As they prepared to depart, Martha Patterson approached to bid them farewell, her warm embrace for Emma conveying approval and support that transcended mere social pleasantry. "You did wonderfully, my dear," she whispered. "This town needs more women willing to speak their minds clearly." The journey back to Evergreen Ranch was subdued, all three travelers lost in their own thoughts about the morning's events. Emma found herself repeatedly returning to Reynolds' pointed reference to their marriage arrangement. How had he learned such details? The information about Jackson's advertisement hadn't been widely shared, and Emma's status as a mail order bride was something they had carefully obscured in their public narrative. "Reynolds has a source close to us," she said finally, breaking the contemplative silence. "Someone who knows details about our arrangement that weren't part of our public story." Jackson's expression darkened. "I've been thinking the same." The reference was too specific to be mere fishing for reaction. But who? Frank wondered aloud. Only a handful of people know the truth. Mrs. Whitley, Jenny, Tobias, myself, and a few of the senior ranch hands. None would betray you, Mr. Cooper. "Perhaps it's not direct betrayal," Emma suggested. "Reynolds mentioned having sources in town. He might be piecing together information from multiple places. The stagecoach driver who brought me to Pine Ridge, people who observed my arrival, perhaps even intercepted correspondence." Jackson nodded slowly. "Reynolds is methodical. He wouldn't rely on a single source." His expression grew troubled. "Whatever his methods, he clearly intends to use our arrangement against us somehow. The question is how," Emma mused, "and when." The answer came sooner than any of them anticipated. As they approached Evergreen Ranch, they spotted a rider waiting at the main gate, a young boy of perhaps 12, stamping his feet against the cold beside his pony. "That's Tommy Johnson from the telegraph office," Frank identified as they drew nearer. The boys straightened as they approached, clearly relieved by their arrival. "Mr. Cooper, got an urgent telegram for you, sir. Mr. Johnson said to deliver it directly, no matter how long I had to wait." Jackson accepted the yellow envelope, tipping the boy generously before tearing it open. As he read the brief message, his expression shifted from curiosity to grim concentration. "Oh, what is it?" Emma asked, concern rising at his evident tension. Jackson handed her the telegram without comment. The message was brief, but its implications enormous. "Railroad representatives arriving tomorrow. Stop schedule changed at Reynolds. Request stop visiting his ranch first. Then yours Thursday stop. Clara sending this warning from Denver. Stop, be prepared. Tomorrow." Emma breathed, the implications immediately clear. "We've lost a day of preparation." "Reynolds engineered this," Jackson confirmed grimly, pocketing the telegram. "He couldn't prevent the railroad representatives from visiting Evergreen, so he's ensuring they see his operation first, and with minimal notice for us to prepare." Frank's weathered face creased with concern. "We're ready for inspection, Mr. Cooper. The ranch is in good order." "But we planned for additional preparations," Jackson pointed out. "The south barn needs repairs. The breeding documentation requires updating, and we still need to finalize the expansion projections for the presentation. Then we'll work through the night, Emma declared practically. The entire ranch will help. This is too important to concede any advantage to Reynolds. Jackson studied her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. You understand what's at stake? Of course I do, Emma replied simply. Evergreen's future is my future now. Something shifted in Jackson's expression, a warming, a deepening of the respect that had been growing between them. Yes, he agreed, softly. It is. By the time they reached the main house, Jackson had formulated a strategy. Frank would oversee the physical preparations, ensuring every building and fence was in optimal condition, every animal properly tended, every ranch hand briefed on their role during the inspection. Jackson himself would finalize the financial projections and breeding program documentation that formed the technical core of their proposal. Emma's role would be to prepare the house and coordinate the social aspects of the representatives' visit, the dinner they would host, the presentation of Evergreen as not merely a business operation, but a stable, well-established family enterprise, with deep roots in the community and clear vision for the future. Mrs. Whitley, Emma called as they entered the house, wasting no time. We need to talk immediately. The railroad representatives are arriving tomorrow, and we must be ready. The housekeeper appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Tomorrow? But I thought... Plans have changed, Emma informed her briskly. Reynolds has arranged for them to visit his ranch first, then ours on Thursday. We need to prepare everything a day earlier than expected. To her credit, Mrs. Whitley adapted immediately to the urgency of the situation. What do you need me to do, Mrs. Cooper? Emma quickly outlined her requirements: the finest linens for the guest rooms, the best china and crystal for dinner, a menu that would showcase both quality and the bounty of Evergreen Ranch. We'll need to work through the night, she concluded. Can you send Jenny to town for any supplies we're missing? And perhaps Tobias could ride to neighboring ranches to borrow anything we can't quickly obtain. Consider it done, Mrs. Whitley assured her, already moving to assess her pantry resources. Those railroad men won't find finer hospitality anywhere. In the territory, Reynolds' fancy imported goods notwithstanding. Emma squeezed the older woman's hand gratefully. Thank you, Mrs. Whitley. I knew I could count on you. As the housekeeper hurried off to begin preparations, Emma turned to find Jackson, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. Admiration mixed with something deeper, more personal. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. You, he said simply, taking charge as if you've been mistress of Evergreen for years rather than days. Emma brushed aside the compliment, though it warmed her nonetheless. We have work to do, Jackson. The ledgers and expansion projections need reviewing before you present them. He nodded, visibly refocusing on the task at hand. My study, then. We'll work together on the financial documentation while the others handle the physical preparations. As they moved toward his study, Emma was struck by how naturally they had fallen into partnership, dividing responsibilities according to their strengths, supporting each other's decisions, working toward a common goal without hesitation or conflict. What had begun as a business arrangement, a marriage of convenience between strangers, was rapidly evolving into something neither had anticipated. A genuine team bound by mutual respect and growing affection that transcended their practical beginnings. Whether that evolution would continue, whether respect and partnership might deepen into something more personal, more intimate, remained to be seen. But as they settled into the work before them, Emma found herself increasingly certain that whatever the railroad representatives decided, whatever challenges Reynolds might yet present, she had found her place beside Jackson Cooper at Evergreen Ranch. And that discovery, unexpected as it was, felt remarkably like coming home. The night before the railroad representative's arrival passed in a flurry of activity. Every corner of Evergreen Ranch hummed with purpose. Ranch hands mending fences and grooming livestock, Mrs. Whitley directing a small army of borrowed help. In the kitchen, Jackson hunched over ledgers and projections until his eyes grew weary. Emma worked alongside everyone, moving between house and outbuildings with quiet efficiency, offering encouragement here, practical solutions there. By dawn, exhaustion had settled into her bones, but satisfaction outweighed fatigue. Evergreen stood ready, its best face prepared for scrutiny. "You should rest," Jackson urged as morning light spilled across the dining room where they shared coffee. "You've been awake more than 24 hours. Emma shook her head. "I'll rest when they've gone. Today is too important." He studied her face, noting the shadows beneath her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. "Emma Cooper," he said softly, "you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." The railroad representatives arrived promptly at 10. 3 men in expensive suits who radiated city sophistication and calculated assessment. Mr. Harrington, the senior member, carried himself with the confident authority of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. His companions, Morris and Westfield, followed his lead while noting details he might miss. Jackson greeted them at the front gate, Emma beside him, presenting the picture of capable partnership in her best blue dress with his mother's necklace at her throat. "Welcome to Evergreen Ranch," Jackson said, extending his hand. "We're honored by your consideration." "Cooper," Harrington acknowledged, his handshake firm. "Mrs. Cooper, Reynolds spoke highly of your operation, despite your competition for this contract." Emma noted the test in his words. "Mr. Reynolds is an accomplished businessman," she replied diplomatically, "though our approaches to ranching differ considerably." Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly at her poised response. "Indeed? How so, Mrs. Cooper?" "Evergreen isn't merely a business investment to us," she explained as Jackson led them toward the main barn. "It's our home, our legacy, our daily work. Every decision we make considers not just profit, but sustainability for generations to come." The inspection proceeded methodically. Every building examined, breeding records reviewed, grazing lands surveyed despite the snow. Jackson presented their operation with quiet confidence, Emma adding perspective that highlighted Evergreen's unique advantages. "Our proximity to Silver Creek ensures reliable water access even in drought years," Jackson explained as they viewed the northern pastures. "We've developed water management systems that minimize waste while maximizing herd health." Morris, the youngest representative, appeared particularly impressed. "Reynolds' operation is larger," he acknowledged, "but your attention to detail is exceptional, Cooper." As afternoon yielded to evening, Emma excused herself to oversee final dinner preparations. Mrs. Whitley had transformed the dining room into a showcase of elegant hospitality, candles glowing on polished silver, crystal glasses catching the light, the table set with precision that would impress even Eastern standards. The meal itself became a subtle demonstration of Evergreen's quality. Beef from their own herd, prepared to perfection, vegetables from their root cellar, bread from wheat grown in their south fields. Each course represented not just fine dining, but the ranch's self-sufficiency and attention to excellence. As Mrs. Whitley served coffee and apple pie, Harrington leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Cooper, Mrs. Cooper, I've inspected dozens of operations throughout the territory. Few demonstrate the combination of business acumen and personal investment I've witnessed today." Jackson inclined his head at the compliment. "Evergreen represents 15 years of daily commitment. With Emma's partnership, we're positioned for expansion without sacrificing the quality standards we've established." "Your wife's contributions seem considerable," Westfield observed, glancing at Emma with newfound respect. Reynolds mentioned you were recently married? Yes, Emma confirmed, meeting Jackson's eyes briefly across the table. Though it feels as if we've been partners much longer. The words held more truth than she had intended to reveal. Somehow, in the space of mere days, their arrangement had transformed into genuine partnership, mutual respect deepening into something neither had anticipated. After dinner, Jackson invited the men to his study for brandy and business discussion. Emma retired to the parlor, finally allowing exhaustion to claim her as she sank into an armchair before the fire. She must have dozed, for she woke to Jackson's gentle touch on her shoulder. "They've gone to their rooms," he murmured. "You should get some rest, Emma." "How did it go?" she asked, blinking away sleep. "Well, I think..." His expression was cautiously optimistic. "Harrington was impressed by our breeding program and expansion capacity. The final decision won't come until next week, but we've made our case strongly." Emma rose, swaying slightly with fatigue. Jackson's hands steadied her, strong and warm at her waist. They stood close, the firelight casting golden highlights across his serious features. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything you've done these past days, for becoming the partner I never knew I needed." Emma looked up at him, suddenly aware of how his presence had become essential to her in ways that transcended their practical arrangement. "We make a good team," she offered simply. "More than that," Jackson's voice deepened, his hands still, at her waist. "Emma, when I placed that advertisement, I expected a business arrangement. I never expected to find..." "What?" she whispered when he hesitated. "You," he finished simply. "Someone who sees this land the way I do, who understands what I'm trying to build here, who fits into my life as if she was always meant to be part of it." The declaration hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way Jackson Cooper rarely allowed himself to be. Emma's heart quickened as she recognized the truth in his words and in her own feelings. "Jackson," she began, but he shook his head gently. "You don't need to respond now. We have time." His thumbs traced small circles at her waist. "I just wanted you to know that whatever began as necessity has become the most fortunate circumstance of my life." He bent slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her time to withdraw if she wished. Emma lifted her face to his, meeting his kiss with a certainty that surprised them both. His lips were warm and gentle, the contact brief but filled with promise. When they parted, something had fundamentally shifted between them. Arrangement, becoming choice, practicality, yielding to genuine affection. "Good night, Emma Cooper," Jackson murmured, reluctantly releasing her. "Good night, Jackson," she replied, her smile holding certainty rather than doubt. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Emma reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 1 week ago, she had stepped from a stagecoach, a desperate woman with nothing but a carpetbag and fading hope. Tonight, she was mistress of Evergreen Ranch, partner to a man of integrity and vision, building a future neither had imagined possible. Their wedding night discovery hadn't been silver or gold hidden in a forgotten trunk, or secrets concealed in property deeds. It had been simpler and more profound. The discovery that sometimes life's most practical arrangements can lead to the most unexpected gifts. That two people brought together by necessity might find in each other's strengths and character exactly what they never knew they were seeking. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.